Story 1.
Karma strikes. Cheating wife contracts STD, leading to devastating consequences, divorce, and revenge. Timothy, commonly referred to as Tim by his buddies, glanced at his cell phone upon receiving a message from Candace, or Candy, as she preferred to be called, his spouse of half a decade. He had just secured a service contract with a major company in California, with branches across the nation. He anticipated that his boss, Jake Hudson, would be thrilled, as this contract signified significant expansion for his IT firm and a considerable boost in his salary. Perhaps now, he mused, he and Candy could finally begin their planned journey of starting a family. Yet, he harbored concerns that had been nagging at him since he and his wife joined Jake on a camping trip a little over a week ago. There was a subtle change in her demeanor upon their return from the trip. It seemed her mind was preoccupied with something else most of the time, and she had become slightly irritable with him. However, there was more. Upon returning home and tossing their clothes in the hamper, he noticed something unusual in the gusset of one of her underwear. Picking them up, he observed that something had solidified with a distinctive odor. Suddenly, realization struck him, and he felt as though his entire world had crumbled. He didn't know whose fluid was in her underwear, but he vowed to uncover the truth. Aware of an upcoming trip to the West Coast, he consulted a lawyer to explore his options. If Candy was indeed unfaithful, he reasoned, it would spell the end of their marriage. "Are you certain your wife is being unfaithful?" Ruby Hawkins inquired. Ruby, specializing in family law and divorce, came recommended by a friend who had recently divorced due to infidelity. "Not entirely," he admitted, "but I need certainty, and if she is, I want a divorce." "Well," Ruby began, "most divorces in this state are no fault. You could file on grounds of infidelity, but you'll require solid evidence like photos or video." "Exactly," Tim queried. "If you wish, I can have an investigator monitor her activities to confirm," Ruby affirmed. "Please do," Tim replied. "What should I expect in terms of divorce proceedings, given she earns roughly as much as I do with her teaching job?" "There's a chance we can avoid alimony," Ruby explained. "With no real estate or children, assets would likely be split evenly. Your retirement stays yours, and so does hers. If she is indeed cheating, we'll use that as grounds and leverage any evidence we gather for a favorable outcome. I'll start compiling the necessary paperwork, and we'll proceed once we have evidence." "All right," Tim agreed. "Go ahead. I'll be away for about 3 days, which I reckon is when she might act." Ruby enlisted her investigator Marvin Johnson, who proposed Tim install a tracking app on Candy's phone. Additionally, he provided Tim with a device for recording landline calls and an audio recorder to conceal in Candy's purse. Tim despised resorting to such measures, but felt compelled to uncover the truth. There were other indicators, too. Since the camping trip, Jake seemed more arrogant and disdainful than usual, as if he held some secret knowledge. During the week, Candy drove him to the airport, bidding him farewell with a kiss. He assured her he would call her that night after dinner. She responded warmly and wished him safe travels. On the first night away, as agreed, he called Candy, only to be surprised when she mentioned she'd be working as a waitress at a party Jake was hosting that evening. According to her, there was an emergency as one of the original waitstaff fell ill and Jake requested her assistance. Tim hadn't been informed of such plans by Jake. Candy explained that Jake promised her $150 for the evening, which would be helpful since she wouldn't be returning to work for a couple of weeks. Tim knew classes would resume soon, and he understood she could use the extra money, but he felt uneasy. He questioned her decision, to which she replied affirmatively, expressing her love for him before saying goodnight. After ending the call, a knot of worry formed in his gut. He decided to phone the investigator to inform them about Candy's new job. "Just wanted to inform you, Candy's been asked to waitress for a party at Jake Hudson's house," Tim stated. Marvin confirmed that they would keep him posted, and Tim thanked him before ending the call. The next day, he called Candy's cell but got no answer. He also tried the house phone, reaching only the answering machine. Surely she didn't spend the night with Jake, he thought. However, his hopes were shattered when he received an email from Marvin that afternoon. "Candy spent the night at Hudson's house and she's still there," the email read. "She was quite busy the night before. I've attached a couple of photos, but I want to warn you, they're pretty graphic. I'll give you my full report when you return." Tim opened the attachments and his heart sank. There was his beloved wife of 5 years, engaged in explicit acts. One involved Jake, while the others were colleagues he once considered friends. The second photo showed her sprawled on the floor. Tears streamed down his face as his hands trembled. He couldn't believe what he saw. Timothy, known as Tim to his friends, tried calling her phone again, but it went straight to voicemail. He also dialed the house phone, encountering only the answering machine. Leaving no message, he sought solace in the hotel bar. The next morning, he checked the tracker, confirming Candy's phone remained at Jake's house. Marvin verified this assumption with an email containing more photos, including a disturbing scene involving Jake, his son Mike, and others from Jake's IT firm. He once trusted them all, but not anymore. He didn't recognize the other 3 men and assumed they were Mike's friends. Concluding his business in California, Tim left the hotel, contract in hand, and caught an early flight home. Arriving home, he noticed Candy's car was gone. Checking the tracker, her phone remained at Jake's. Inside, he changed clothes and called Ruby's office. To his surprise, Ruby's receptionist informed him that she was available and could see him that afternoon. Tim called Candy's cell and was startled when she answered, sounding out of breath. He asked her where she was, and she claimed to be at home, catching up. Shocked by her blatant lie, Tim informed her that he was done in California and on his way home. Candy expressed excitement at his return and suggested that she pick him up at the airport when he landed. However, Tim declined, telling her not to bother and that he would grab a taxi. After ending the call, he wondered if she noticed his lack of affection. Shaking his head, he left the house to see Ruby. Candy glanced at her phone after Tim hung up. His usual "I love you" sign-off was absent and his tone seemed distant. She had intended to leave after the first night, but the allure of being between Jake and his son was irresistible. She justified it to herself as something she owed to her own desires. She assumed it would all end once classes resumed, and Tim would remain unaware. Thus, she spent the following day and night with Jake and his son Mike. While Jake briefly left for work, Mike kept her occupied and even arranged for friends to join for a group encounter. Upon Jake's return, she was in bed with Mike on Jake's bed, joining in. Jake suggested sending Tim away more frequently. "I have classes soon," she explained, "so I won't be available on weekdays. I can't risk it while Tim's at home." "Why not?" Jake suggested. "Perhaps he'd enjoy seeing you with other men for a change." They chuckled at the notion. Admitting her attachment to Jake, she affirmed her love for Tim and reluctance to hurt him. Jake proposed arranging for Tim's absence over weekends, allowing her to spend time with them. "But Tim will find out eventually," she voiced. "He's not oblivious." "Don't fret," Jake assured, reaching for his camera. "I'll handle him. Just one condition," he added. "What's that?" she inquired. "You won't be in bed with him anymore," Jake declared. "You're ours now, got it?" "How do I manage that?" she questioned. "You'll think of something," Jake dismissed. "Use an excuse like a headache." "I'll try," she acquiesced. Unaware of the surveillance, they remained oblivious to a van across the street, with minicams recording their actions. Tim's devastation upon seeing the evidence Marvin compiled was profound. In addition to photos, there were videos showcasing her acts with multiple men, far beyond what she would do with him. His love for her evaporated as he pondered her behavior. Ruby attempted to console him, but his anguish persisted. How could she change so drastically after 5 years? What had he done to deserve this? And Jake, whom he once considered a friend, now revealed his true nature. "I'll initiate divorce proceedings," Ruby suggested, citing infidelity. "We could also file for alienation of affection against Jake and your colleagues. Although these cases are often challenging, I believe we can secure a favorable settlement." "Do whatever is necessary," Tim responded. "Just don't make any reckless moves." Ruby cautioned. "I don't want to bail you out of jail." "I won't," Tim assured. "When will the papers be ready?" "I'll have everything prepared in a couple of days," Ruby assured him. "Meanwhile, try to maintain normalcy with your wife." "I'm not a great actor," Tim confessed. "I won't touch her again." "Who knows what she's caught from all those men," Tim declared. "Tell her you're not feeling well," Ruby suggested. "That should buy you some time." Tim agreed with a nod. "Yeah, okay," he replied. "Thanks." Leaving Ruby's office, he felt somewhat relieved but still queasy. In his car, Tim realized he couldn't continue working for Jake or being around the men who betrayed him. He found the number he needed in his contacts and dialed it, hoping for the best. "Carlson," the voice answered. "John, it's Tim Burns," Tim said. "Tim, how are you, my friend?" John asked. "Not great," Tim admitted. "Listen, is that position at Empire still available?" John Carlson had long sought to recruit Tim, but Tim's loyalty to Jake had kept him from considering it. Now that loyalty was gone. "Absolutely," John confirmed. "Are you finally joining an established company?" "Something like that," Tim replied. "I've realized I can't stay at my current job." "I'm sorry to hear that," John sympathized. "Can I help?" "Just give me a job," Tim requested. "I'll work as hard for you as I did for Jake." "Done," John agreed. "How about starting on Monday?" "Perfect," Tim accepted. "Great. Why don't you and your wife join us for dinner tonight? Rose will make her famous lasagna, and we can discuss your compensation package, John proposed. I'd love to, but I can't bring candy, Tim declined. Oh, John inquired, what's wrong? I'd rather not discuss it over the phone, Tim said, but I can explain more tonight. Of course, John understood, sounding concerned. Rose is a counselor, maybe she can help. That sounds good, Tim acknowledged. I'll let Rose know. Can you come by at 6:30? John asked. Absolutely, Tim confirmed. 6:30 it is. Thanks, buddy. My pleasure, John replied. Feeling a weight lifted, Tim drove home. Not finding Candy there, he entered, showered, changed, and penned his resignation letter. Candy arrived around 5 p.m., noticing Tim at his computer. She leaned in for a kiss, but he turned and she landed on his cheek. Is everything okay? She asked, surprised. Not really, Tim admitted. I'm not feeling well. Maybe it's jet lag. I'll sleep on the futon tonight. Sleeping out? She queried. Where are you going? I have dinner plans, Tim answered. Are you meeting someone? She asked, sounding concerned. Are you accusing me of cheating? Tim countered. No, I've never cheated on you and I never will. Can you say the same? She recoiled in horror, doubting if he knew. He couldn't possibly know, she reassured herself. No, I can't, she replied. Tim remained unconvinced. So, how was your trip to California? She asked, attempting to change the subject. Successful, he replied. And how did your gig at Jake's house go? It went smoothly, she responded. Even though it was challenging, it was still enjoyable. I can imagine, he remarked, his voice devoid of emotion. Glancing at his watch, he decided it was time to leave. I should get going, he informed her, saving his work and shutting down his computer. Standing up, he walked past her without a word and entered the master bedroom to change into something less casual. Upon returning, Candy was seated on the couch. How long will you be out? She inquired. I'm not sure, he replied. Don't wait up for me. Goodbye. Grabbing his keys, he exited the house. She couldn't help but notice that he didn't kiss her or say he loved her as he always did when leaving. After seeing his car depart, she picked up the house phone and dialed Jake, unaware that their conversation was being recorded. Jake, I think he suspects something, she confided. What makes you think that? Jake queried. He wouldn't touch me at all, she explained. He always gives me a kiss and says he loves me, but not today. He seemed distant and just left, mentioning a dinner appointment. Really? Jake responded. Did he mention with whom? No, he didn't, she admitted. Jake, what if he knows? What if he plans to leave me? Then so be it, Jake scoffed. You can always stay with us, and as for Timmy boy, I'll keep him busy enough that he won't be home much. But I don't want to lose him, Candy lamented. I love him. Yeah, your actions over the past couple of days really show that, don't they? Jake retorted. That's not fair, Jake, she protested. I know what I did with you guys, and yes, I enjoyed it, but I still love him. I don't want to lose him. Sure, Jake dismissed her concern. Let him cool off. Eventually he'll come around. And if he doesn't, well, we can handle that too. You're not going to hurt him, are you? She worried. Not explicitly, Jake assured. We'll just need to make him see things our way, and you'll play a part in that. What? Candy was taken aback. That's right, Jake confirmed. When the time comes, you'll help us make him understand. Remember where your loyalty lies. And remember, I have videos that could cause quite a scandal if they were to surface. You wouldn't dare, Candy protested. Oh, I would, Jake asserted. I have footage from the camping trip and other compromising situations. You belong to me, so it's up to you to keep Timmy boy in line. Feeling trapped, Candy reluctantly agreed. Okay, Jake, she conceded, but please don't hurt him. Jake smirked over the phone. Sure, he dismissed her concern, ending the call. Meanwhile, Tim arrived at the large 2-story home where John and Rose Carlson resided. He exited his car, bringing along the bottle of wine he had picked up on the way. John greeted him at the door, graciously accepting the wine. Come on in, Tim. John welcomed him with a smile. And thank you. It'll be put to good use tonight. Following John inside, Tim was introduced to Rose, who was waiting in the dining room with her lasagna. Tim, this is my wife, Rose, John introduced. Rose, meet Tim Burns, our new account representative. Tim shook Rose's hand as John opened the bottle of wine. Nice to meet you, Tim, Rose greeted him with a smile. Pleasure's mine, Mrs. Carlson, Tim replied. Please call me Rose, she insisted. Mrs. Carlson sounds too formal. Seated at the table, Rose served up portions of lasagna while John poured the wine. Tim expressed his gratitude, acknowledging the delicious meal. This is the best lasagna I've ever had, he complimented. I'm pleased you enjoyed it, Rose remarked. It's one of my specialties. So, Tim, I don't mean to pry, But I'm curious why you left Jake so abruptly. Did something happen? John inquired. Tim nodded before elaborating. Yeah, something happened, he admitted. Please, Tim, share with us, Rose encouraged. Taking a moment to collect his thoughts, Tim recounted the events. That's tough, John sympathized. I can relate. I've been through something similar, though under different circumstances. What's your plan now, besides changing jobs? I've consulted a lawyer and I'm filing for divorce, Tim revealed. My attorney says it'll likely be an even split. Have you considered counseling? Rose suggested. It's beyond that point, Tim responded. I don't understand what's gotten into Candy. It's like she underwent a sudden transformation into someone I don't recognize. How are you coping with all of this? Rose inquired. Not very well, Tim confessed. My lawyer advises me to act normally around Candy, but it's challenging. I can't even bear to look at her. Perhaps counseling could help, she suggested. I might consider it, Tim acknowledged. John is right. Rose is the best in the field, John interjected. I believe she can assist you through this if you're open to it. Plus, it's covered in your benefits package. That's a positive, Tim chuckled. I'm serious, John assured him. Rose was invaluable to me during a tough time. I'm confident she can support you too. Addressing Rose, John asked, Can you fit him into your schedule? Absolutely, she confirmed. I propose an hour per week. How does that sound, Tim? After considering the offer, Tim agreed. All right, I'll give it a try, he agreed. John smiled, patting Tim on the shoulder. Good decision, he praised. I'll ensure you have the necessary time for counseling. Coordinate with Rose and let me know your arrangement. I will, Tim affirmed. Thank you. Now, if you don't mind, dear, Tim and I will adjourn to my office to discuss his new position, John announced. Of course I don't mind, Rose replied with a smile. I'm excited to collaborate with you, Tim. Thank you, Tim expressed as he stood with John. They proceeded to John's home office, where he poured them each a snifter of brandy. Over the next 2 hours, they hashed out details of Tim's new role. By the end of the discussion, Tim felt empowered, as though he were reclaiming control of his life. After shaking hands with John, Tim returned home. It was around 10 p.m. when he pulled into his driveway, noticing the lights were still on. He hoped Candy was alone. Entering the apartment, he found Candy on the couch. How did your meeting go? She inquired. Very well, thank you, he replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to bed. Good night. Retreating to the second bedroom where his computer was, Tim began undressing. Are you sleeping in here now? Candy questioned from the doorway. Yes, Tim confirmed. I'm still not feeling well, so I'll sleep on the futon. Is that all right? Sure, I suppose, she responded. It's just that you've been away for 3 days, and I was hoping we could, spend some time together. I'm not feeling up to it tonight, Tim stated. In truth, the thought of physical closeness with her made him uncomfortable. Okay, she murmured softly. Maybe tomorrow? I'm not sure, he replied. We'll see. Nodding, she turned away, pondering whether he knew anything about her recent activities. The next day, Tim arose before Candy, prepared his resignation letter, and brewed a cup of coffee. Seeing Candy's purse on the kitchen counter, he grabbed the audio recorder, then downloaded the previous day's phone call. He left the apartment without saying goodbye or expressing affection to Candy. As he departed, Candy heard the door close and lay in bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Upon arriving at the office, Tim kept to himself. After exchanging greetings with his secretary, he retreated to his office and shut the door. While packing his belongings, Jake entered the room. What's this? Jake queried. Tim reached into his briefcase and extracted 2 envelopes. One contains the signed contract from California, he explained, and the other holds my resignation, effective immediately. I expect a bonus for securing the California account and my final pay, including my remaining vacation time. Resignation? Jake exclaimed, taken aback. Why are you leaving? I need you, Jake protested. Seriously? Tim retorted. You honestly don't know why. You think I'm naive? I'm not. Frankly, certain revelations have surfaced, compelling me to resign. I've secured a position with another company. I'll be leaving here shortly, then heading to HR. Wait, Tim, can't we discuss this? Jake implored. Tim shook his head. There's nothing to discuss, Jake, Tim asserted. I'm done, finished. I once considered you a friend, but you betrayed me and ruined my marriage. Find someone else to deceive. So this is about that? Jake probed. Just so you know, your wife willingly engaged in closeness with me, Jake divulged. We don't need to let that ruin your career. Just go with the flow for now. Let Candy explore her desires. When she's done, she'll return to you. You're despicable, aren't you? Tim accused. You expect me to accept that? By the way, how long have you been involved with her? The first time was during the camping trip, Jake confessed. On the second day, while you and the others were skiing, she initiated it in your tent, claiming I was superior to you. Then she begged me to make love to her. Remember when you suddenly sent me away to handle something at the office? You wanted me out of the way to be with my wife, right? Tim realized. Yeah, so what? Jake shrugged. But Tim wasn't done. And hiring her as a waitress at your party was just another ploy to sleep with her, right? Correct. So what? Jake reiterated. Tim halted the audio recording he had secretly initiated when Jake entered. Thank you for your confession, Tim declared. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm finished packing. I'll head to HR and I'll be on my way. Wait, Jake protested. You can't use that recording. We'll see, Tim remarked. I'm leaving. Goodbye, Jake. Rot in hell. Wait, you forgot something, Jake said, holding up a photo of Candy from Tim's desk. I didn't forget, Tim replied. I don't want it. If you and your son are so keen on her, she's all yours. I'm done with both of you. Goodbye. With that, he exited the office, leaving Jake bewildered. How did Tim discover what had happened between Candy, him, and his son? Jake pondered. What do you mean he resigned? Candy demanded when Jake called. He handed me a signed contract and a resignation letter and left, Jake explained. He knows, Candy. I don't know how, but he knows. What did you tell him? She inquired. The truth, Jake admitted. I told him about the first incident on the camping trip. You fool, she scolded. And? Jake prompted. So I told him everything, Jake admitted. He even left the photo of you he had on his desk. Great, she sighed, tears streaming down her face. What now? She asked. Not my concern, Jake shrugged. Let your husband handle it. Unless you want me to come over and enlighten him. No, she refused. You've done enough, thank you. Stay out of it. I'll handle it. Or not, Jake said dismissively. After that, he ended the call. Candy glanced at her phone, tears streaming down her face. She dreaded the thought of divorce, but she understood Tim's stance on her infidelity. Determined to salvage their marriage, she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, sobbing over her actions. A few minutes later, Tim arrived home. Spotting Candy's car, he scanned for Jake's vehicle but found none. Carrying his box and briefcase, he entered. He noticed Candy on the couch but said nothing as he headed into his office. After locking the door, he checked for voice recordings, found one of Candy's conversation with Jake, and promptly forwarded it to his lawyer. Hello, Tim, she greeted when he called. I've just received your latest email. I'm filing your paperwork now. Good, Tim responded. When can they be served? If you'd like, I can arrange for them to be delivered late this afternoon, she offered. Will that work? It will, thanks, he acknowledged. After hanging up, he retrieved his .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol from the weapons safe, more as a precaution than intent. In the kitchen, he placed it on the table. We need to talk, he stated, setting the pistol down for quick access. Is that necessary? She questioned, pointing at the weapon. I hope not, he replied. Just a precaution in case your lover decides to show up. My lover, she queried. Don't play coy, he retorted sternly. Sit down, we have things to discuss. Terrified, she obeyed, uncertain of her husband's intentions. Firstly, Tim began, someone will serve you with papers later today. Divorce papers. Candy gasped. Why? I don't want a divorce. I love you. Bull, Tim countered. I know about you and Jake, his son, and others you've been with lately. So I filed for divorce due to infidelity. Infidelity? She objected. You have no proof, Tim smirked, revealing an envelope containing time-stamped photos showing her with multiple men, including Jake. I also have video and audio, Tim added. Interested? She shook her head, realizing it was futile. Good, he said. Given the circumstances, I've been more than fair. No support, half the bank funds split. Each keeps their retirement, and you keep your belongings. I've canceled your credit card and have a check for your share. Also, a restraining order mandates you stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. You have until being served to pack. You're kicking me out, she whimpered, tears flowing. Essentially, Tim confirmed. What if I contest, she ventured. Tim chuckled. Not wise, he cautioned. Think of the consequences if these photos surfaced. Think about your job. You wouldn't dare, she protested. Want to bet? Tim challenged. Candy hesitated before admitting defeat. No, she conceded. I can't. Risk it. I need my job. Exactly, Tim affirmed. 2 more things. What? She asked, despondent. You'll return your rings and drop my surname, he demanded. You've become heartless, she accused, removing her rings. You gave me cause, Tim responded. I just want to know one thing. What changed from a loving, faithful wife to this? She glanced down before speaking. It happened the second day of the camping trip, she recounted. You were out on the boat and I was in the tent. Jake came by and saw me. I had undressed and was lying there, trying to rest. When Jake walked into the tent, he seemed embarrassed at first, seeing me undressed like that. We started talking and then he exposed himself, and that was it. So some guy with a bigger one than mine drops his pants and you're on it like white on rice, Tim remarked. And that's all it took for you to become a cheating woman? How many times did you sleep with him on that trip? Twice, she admitted. The first time when you were out water skiing, and the second time when Jake sent you back to the office. Tim shook his head and gestured at the photos. I see that none of your lovers used any protection, he observed. Weren't you worried about getting pregnant or contracting something? I'm still on the pill, she defended. That doesn't eliminate the risks, Tim pointed out. You could still get pregnant or contract a disease. Was that what you were aiming for? Oh God, no, she insisted. Tim shook his head. You know, in all the time we've been together, I've been hit on a lot by women who look much better than you, he confessed. I turned them all down. I believed I had a loving and faithful wife at home whom I'd never betray. But you didn't even consider the consequences. You didn't care about my feelings. All you wanted was pleasure. I hope it was worth it to you. Now pack your things. I expect you gone once you're served. Tim, please, she pleaded. Can't we get some counseling? Please, I'll never do it again, I promise. Can't you forgive me this time? I will never forgive you for what you've done, Tim declared, his expression harder than she had ever seen before. From the moment Jake dropped his trousers, you willingly betrayed me, and I can never forgive that level of betrayal. But don't you love me enough to work through this? She asked. He shook his head. No, right now I can't even look at you, he admitted. The sooner you're out of my life, the better. Now start packing. Whatever you leave behind will be disposed of. Sobbing, she stood up and went into the master bedroom to pack. Tim watched as Candy brought out bags full of items. She stopped once and looked at him. Can you at least help me take these to my car? She requested. Nope, Tim refused. You're on your own. And remember, anything left behind will be discarded or donated. She carried the bags to her car and returned for more. Exhausted, she admitted, I can't fit anything else. Can I return for the rest later? No, Tim reiterated. You won't be allowed back. Ask your parents to collect your belongings, or I can hold off disposal for a few days. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that, she acknowledged. Oh my God, I just thought, what will I tell my parents? Try the truth for a change, Tim suggested. Tell them you cheated on me with my boss and others and I had to ask you to leave. Seriously? She questioned. They'll disapprove regardless, Tim asserted, but it'll be worse if you lie or sugarcoat it. You know how they feel about dishonesty. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. I believe that's for you, Tim remarked. Candy approached the door cautiously and found a sheriff's deputy standing there. Are you Candace Burns? He inquired. She affirmed, yes, that's me. May I see some ID, please? He requested. She retrieved her driver's license and presented it to him. After verifying it, he returned it to her and handed her an envelope. You've been served, ma'am, he informed her. Additionally, there's a restraining order mandating you to vacate the premises immediately. You can sign the divorce papers now if you wish. She nodded and retrieved the divorce documents. After reviewing them, she asked for a pen and signed them. I'll deliver this to the attorney, he assured her. You need to leave now. If you attempt to return, you'll be arrested. Do you understand? Yes, she replied, tears streaming down her face. She glanced back at Tim. I'm deeply sorry, she apologized. Yeah, me too, Tim responded. Goodbye. Goodbye, she whispered as she departed. The deputy nodded at Tim before leaving. The following days were chaotic for Tim. Candy made no attempts to contact him, but Jake left 2 threatening voicemails on the house phone. Damn it, Tim, I know you're there, he yelled. If you don't drop this lawsuit, I'm coming to kick your ass. Tim smirked, saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Ruby, who notified the local sheriff's department. Candy's parents also called, asking if they could retrieve more of her belongings. Sure, just make sure she's not with you. There's a restraining order against her, Tim informed them. Okay, George, Candy's father sighed. When George and Candy's mother arrived, they collected her remaining items and urged Tim to reconsider the divorce. Tim, she made a mistake. Can't you forgive her and take her back? She loves you, Candy's mother pleaded. What did she tell you, Bernice? Tim inquired. She admitted to messing up with your boss, Bernice replied. And that's all? Tim pressed. Yes, she didn't go into details and we didn't pry, Bernice explained. Tim retrieved the envelope containing the photos and SD cards and showed them to Bernice and George. They were appalled by what they saw. I had no idea it was this bad. I'm sorry, Tim. I don't blame you, Bernice expressed. George's anger was evident. I'm going to have a serious talk with our daughter, he vowed. Have you done anything else with these photos? He asked Tim. Tim shook his head. Not yet, but I warned her not to contest the divorce, he disclosed. They sympathized with him before finishing packing Candy's belongings. 30 minutes later, they bid Tim farewell with a warm hug and departed. Later that day, as Tim watched TV, another knock sounded at the door. Glancing through the peephole, he saw Jake, Mike, and 2 former colleagues. He retrieved his pistol from the weapon case, called emergency services, and held the weapon behind his back. Barely opening the door before they barged in, he confronted them with the firearm. We're going to smack you up, Jake threatened. Tim pointed the weapon at Jake, causing them to pause. You really want to test me? Tim challenged. Just so you know, I've already called emergency services, and the police are on their way. If you're here when they arrive, you'll be arrested for violating the restraining order. Jake, he's serious, one of the men cautioned. Jake hesitated, then turned to Tim. Suddenly, they heard a siren nearby and saw flashing red and blue lights. Yes, Jake, I mean it, Tim affirmed. As they turned to depart, 2 imposing uniformed police officers appeared at the door. Tim lowered his pistol. Please, sir, put the weapon down, one officer instructed. Tim complied, placing the pistol on the kitchen counter. Sir, these individuals are violating a restraining order, Tim explained. They forcibly entered my apartment and issued threats. I request their arrest. Do you have a copy of the order? Inquired the other officer. Tim nodded. Yes, officer, I do, he replied, retrieving an envelope from the counter and handing it to the officer, who carefully examined the document. After a brief inspection, the officer returned the order to Tim and turned to the 4 men. Turn around, hands behind your back, the officer ordered. The men glared at Tim as the officers handcuffed them and read them their rights. Once restrained, one officer addressed Tim. Do you possess a license for that firearm? He inquired. Yes, I do, Tim confirmed. Would you like to see it? He then displayed his wallet, revealing the firearm license card and his NRA firearms training card. The officer nodded after inspecting the cards. All right, he acknowledged. Just be cautious with that weapon, understand? I understand, officer. Thank you, Tim acknowledged. The following 3 months passed swiftly for Tim. He found greater satisfaction working at Empire than he ever did under Jake's management. Weekly counseling sessions with Rose aided him in managing his trust and anger issues. Simultaneously, he joined a gym, exercising 3 days a week. Additionally, he enrolled in martial arts classes, primarily for mental discipline. Furthermore, he undertook a diet and exercise course recommended by Rose. The divorce proceeded smoothly, especially as Candy did not contest it. However, the alienation of affection lawsuits encountered some complications. While 2 of them were dismissed, as Ruby had warned, the case against Jake took an unexpected turn. After reviewing evidence and financial disclosures, the judge ruled in Tim's favor, ordering Jake to pay $1 million in restitution. The judge expressed strong disapproval of Jake's actions. Mr. Hudson, your conduct in this matter is utterly reprehensible, the judge admonished. Not only did you exploit a man who considered you a friend, but you also mistreated your authority as his employer to deliberately ruin his marriage and family. Moreover, you repeatedly violated the restraining order against you. Therefore, I rule in favor of the plaintiff and order you to pay restitution in the amount of $1 million. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, Jake's lawyer interjected. Mr. Winthrop, this court finds Mr. Hudson's behavior not only irregular but absolutely despicable. The order stands, the judge affirmed. When must this restitution be paid? Winthrop inquired. Immediately, the judge declared. Unless, of course, your client prefers spending time in jail for contempt. No, Your Honor, my client will comply with the order, Winthrop conceded. Very well, the judge concluded. And may God help you if this check bounces. Case closed. With a gavel strike, the hearing concluded. Jake wrote a check, which his attorney passed to the bailiff. After the judge acknowledged the check, it passed to Ruby, who then handed it to Tim. To Tim's surprise, the check cleared the bank, and he compensated Ruby her portion of the judgment. While employed at Empire, Tim was approached by several of Jake's clients. Word of the lawsuit had spread, and numerous businesses were hesitant to engage with someone who actively sought to wreck another man's marriage. They viewed such behavior as indicative of a lack of trustworthiness. Tim speculated that, at the current rate, Jake would likely be out of business within a year. Throughout this period, Tim declined to date, despite being approached by several pleasant women at work. He considered himself married until the final decree was granted. Only then would he entertain the idea of pursuing a relationship. Upon receiving the final decree, Tim celebrated with colleagues, including a lap dance from a generously endowed stripper. A couple of months after the divorce was finalized, Candy's mother called Tim. "Tim, it's Bernice. Can we talk for a few minutes?" she asked. "Of course, Bernice," he responded. "What's on your mind?" "It's about Candy," she revealed. "She's tested positive for HIV. "I'm sorry to hear that, Bernice," Tim sympathized. "But honestly, I'm not surprised. Besides, we're officially divorced now, so there's little I can do. She's not covered by my insurance, and I'm not responsible for her." "I understand," Bernice acknowledged. "I was hoping you could spare a few minutes to talk to her." "I suppose I can, though I'm unsure of its benefit," he conceded. "Thank you so much," Bernice expressed her gratitude. Tim drove to Bernice and George's residence and was taken aback by Candy's gaunt appearance. She approached him, but he gestured for her to remain seated. With a heavy heart, she complied, inviting him to sit on the couch. "You're looking well, Tim," she remarked. "Better than I remembered." "How have things been for you?" "Things have been good, Candy," he replied. "New job, new friends, and a fresh perspective on life. How about you?" "Not great at all," she confessed. "You know about my HIV status." "That's what your mother informed me," he confirmed. "I'm sorry to hear that, but frankly, I'm not surprised." "Do you know when you contracted it?" he inquired. "I believe it was during one of my encounters at Jake's," she admitted. "I engaged in unprotected lovemaking with multiple partners that day." "Does Jake know?" Tim questioned. She shook her head. "Not yet," she admitted, "but I'll have to inform him so he can get tested. I doubt he'll take it well." "No, probably not," Tim agreed. "Listen, Tim, I want to apologize to you one last time. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for what I've done to you. I now realize the devastation my actions caused. I could have declined at any point, but I didn't. I was foolish and selfish, allowing my desires to override my better judgment, and now I'm facing the consequences. You were the best husband and lover I could have asked for, and I squandered it all for fleeting pleasure. I know you despise me, and you have every right to, but I don't want to leave this world without your forgiveness." Tim pondered her words carefully. It was the first time she took ownership of her actions and acknowledged their impact on others. Though he could continue holding a grudge, he remembered his sessions with Rose. Grudges wouldn't help him move forward. With a nod, he responded. "All right, Candy," he said. "I forgive you." She burst into tears as she sat in her chair. Tim contemplated embracing her but decided against it when she waved him away. "Thank you so much, Tim," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "That means more to me than you know. Listen, I want you to find a woman you can love and trust, marry her, and have children with her. I'm done. I'm finished. But you have your whole life ahead of you, and you deserve to be happy." "Thank you," he replied. "I'll do that. And if you ever want to just talk, let me know, okay?" She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I will, Tim," she assured him. "Thank you for coming over and talking with me. I've missed you so much these last few months." "I've missed the woman I married," Tim said calmly. "How are things with Jake and Mike, by the way?" She shook her head. "Not good," she admitted. "He's gotten very abusive lately. He didn't take losing to you in court very well. You probably know his business has taken quite a hit lately." "I've noticed," Tim acknowledged. "Has he hurt you physically?" "Not yet, but he's very volatile," she replied. "Do you want me to be with you when you tell him about your diagnosis?" Tim offered. "No, but thanks for asking anyway," she declined. "This is my responsibility, and I need to handle it. You know, I keep thinking that if I had just told him to leave that first day at the camping trip, we'd still be together." "That's quite possible," Tim conceded. "But I have a feeling it would have happened at some point anyway. He'd been after you for quite a while." "I think you're right," she agreed. "Listen, I'm getting really tired and I need to rest before I go back. Thank you for coming over. It really does mean more to me than you know." "You're welcome, Candy," he said. "And remember, call me if you just want to talk or something, okay?" She weakly nodded. "I will," she promised. "Goodbye," she added. "Think of me every once in a while, okay?" He sensed a hint of finality in her words and wondered if she was contemplating self-destruction. "I will," he assured her. "Just don't do anything foolish, okay?" She managed to smile. "I won't," she assured him. As he stood and headed for the door, Bernice approached him. "Thank you, Tim," she said, embracing him. "This means more to her than you know, and to me as well." "You're welcome, Bernice," he replied. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" "I will," Bernice promised. A couple of weeks later, Tim was seated on his couch, having dinner and watching the evening news when a report caught his attention. The bodies of a local businessman, his son, and a woman believed to be the man's lover were found earlier today in what police believe was a double homicide and self-destruction, the anchor reported. Jacob Hudson, president and founder of Hudson Consulting, along with his son and an unidentified woman, were discovered dead. All three suffered gunshot wounds. Police are investigating the incident, and further details will be provided as they become available. After overcoming his initial shock, Tim phoned Bernice. She answered the call in tears. "Bernice, what's happening?" he inquired. "We just learned that Candy is dead," she replied. "It appears that Jake shot her, then his own son and himself." "Oh my God," Tim exclaimed. "I saw a report on the news and was hoping it wasn't her." "I'm so sorry." "It's her," Bernice confirmed. "Do the police have any idea why it happened?" Tim inquired. "They're not entirely certain," she explained, "but I believe she told Jake about her HIV diagnosis and he snapped. Autopsies are underway." "I'm truly sorry, Bernice," Tim expressed. "I want you to know I never wished for this." "I understand, Tim," she responded. "Candy made her own choices and faced the consequences. Nonetheless, losing an only child is devastating. I take comfort in thinking she's in a better place now." "Well, if there's anything I can do, please let me know," he offered. "Thank you, Tim," she acknowledged. Candy's memorial service occurred a couple of weeks later, and Tim took time off to support her parents. According to the autopsies, both Jake and Mike were HIV positive, like Candy. Based on police findings, Candy disclosed her diagnosis to Jake, suggesting they get tested. Upon discovering they were also positive, Jake fatally shot her, then his son, and ultimately himself. Tim mourned Candy's passing for a few days, reminiscing about their happier times together. Then, unexpectedly, Cynthia Stone, another colleague, visited him. "Hey, cowboy," she greeted. "Want to join us for happy hour tonight? You seem like you could use some company." Tim hesitated briefly, almost declining, but reconsidered. "What the heck," he responded. "I could use some good company right now." "Sure, count me in." "Great. Then meet us at the hitching post after work, okay?" she suggested, smiling. "I'll be there," he confirmed. "Thanks for the invitation." As she walked away, he contemplated the cycle of life. Then he heard a familiar female voice in his mind. "Go for it, big boy. She's into you," the voice suggested, surprising him. He scanned the surroundings but found no one. A shiver ran down his spine momentarily. "No," he thought to himself. "That can't be possible. Or can it?"
Story 2.
My wife cheated and got a toy from her affair partner, so I made sure they both paid the price. I, 29, male, have been married to my wife, 30, female, for 7 years, and we have a daughter who is 5 years old. Depending on who you ask, some would say we got married young. I know I heard a lot of that while we planned the wedding. The thing is, we have known each other since late in high school, so I feel like we had enough time to get to know each other to the point where I could confidently propose. We were both relatively mature for our ages when we were younger. She knew she wanted to go to medical school, and I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It's part of why I felt we were meant for each other. My HVAC business was already doing really well before I turned 20, so by the time she was ready to go to med school, I was able to support her. I suppose our younger selves would be very happy with where we are, well, career-wise at least. But some things have happened that make me wonder whether there were some red flags I missed. Or whether people just want what they want regardless of how much you care and how much effort you put in. I've never put a wrong foot forward when it comes to my wife. We pretty much grew up into adulthood side by side, so you can't fault me for thinking that I knew her fully. Enough of the yapping, let me try to cut to the chase. As I've said, my wife went to medical school. She did great there, and now she's a general practitioner, which is awesome. I've never been prouder of anyone because I watched her graduate from high school, then university twice. I will admit that I sometimes feared I'd feel inferior with a high-achieving wife, but I'm doing fantastic for myself. I didn't go to college, but that's because I knew it would be a waste of my time. Instead, I used those same 4 years to apply the throttle on some new enterprises I was trying to start, like a detailing business. And my hard work paid off. So yeah, I made a lot, and that surely helps me feel good about myself. Do I regret not going to college, even now? Nope. So my wife, the doctor, obviously works at a hospital, and as expected, she has colleagues she's friends with, and some she steps away from being enemies with. Typical workplace drama, whether you work in a retail store or a tech company. The thing is, it became a bit disconcerting to me when a certain name started to pop up a lot more than the other coworkers I heard about quite often. Let's call the guy Devin. If you've ever heard of the stupid concept of work husbands, that's what Devin started to sound like to me. Anytime something happened at work while she was at lunch, she always happened to be eating lunch with Devin. She was scared of walking to her car when leaving work late at night. Who was there to save the day and accompany her? Devin, of course. There was even a really annoying day when she started to gush about Devin's 2 cats and Chihuahua, which he couldn't stop showing her photos of. At this point, I obviously became very cautious of Devin. I think any man would. After all, it seemed like Devin was interested in her, with how much he seemed to be around her. I joked with her one day, with an ulterior motive, asking whether Devin knew she was married. She said he did, and after a brief pause, she reassured me that I didn't need to worry about him one bit, that he's basically her brother. This didn't really convince me, and it was made worse because I hate hearing sentences including the phrase, like a brother to me. But I decided to let it go at that moment because I didn't have anything solid beyond his name coming up a lot to base strong suspicions on. Now, before I go into what happens next, I need to give you a little bit of background on the sexual side of my relationship with my wife. I've never been the kind of guy who needs to have sex 5 times a week. Now, once or twice in 2 weeks fills, or should I say empties, the tank for me. The best part was that this worked perfectly for my wife too. She isn't a high libido kind of woman, so we had a really harmonious sexual life in the early stages of our marriage. Unfortunately, almost out of nowhere, her interest in sex just died. We spoke about it, and she blamed hormones, stress, the weather, upcoming exams, her diet, and so on. And with each thing we tried to fix, nothing changed. In the end, I never blamed my wife for this. But honestly, even though I could cope with sex just twice a month, it started to become hard on me. I seriously considered looking outside my marriage, but I never came close to acting on such considerations. Now, here's where that comes in. One day, my wife comes home and excitedly tells me that she's interested in us trying to spark up our life in the bedroom again. At this point, it had been about 2 years, and I'd wager that we hadn't had sex more than 5 times in that period. So, of course, I was a bit stunned by her sudden enthusiasm to get things started again. "Oh wow, what's making you so eager for us to start trying again?" I had to ask because sex almost never seemed like something my wife thought about, unless I brought it up. I had a discussion with some people at work about sex, and it really brought up a lot of things that we might be able to try out to spice things up, was what she responded to me. I was on guard when she said this because talking about sex should be less awkward or juvenile among doctors than any other group of people. But I'd never gotten the idea that she and her coworkers talked about things like that. So I asked her what they talked about and who she talked about these things with. After all, I know most of her coworkers by name, just Devin and some of the others. Like I said, I know most of her coworkers by name, so the rest of them being relegated to the others left me feeling uneasy. I felt like challenging her at that point because I felt like it might have been a personal conversation with Devin. And if she was talking about sex with Devin one-on-one, that would not be in good taste, obviously. "No problem, I'm listening," I said. So on she continued, telling me about how the conversation went from how important sex is to sexless marriages to sex toys. And then she let it slip that she used our case as an example in this conversation. I mean, I've never been bitter about the whole sexless situation, but it can be extremely frustrating. So to hear that it's being brought up by her in public conversations with coworkers, by the way, many of whom know me rather well, made me very unhappy with her. However, my wife is a rather private person, so this didn't sound right to me. "So, this was just you and Devin then, right?" I said this quickly to catch her off guard and watch her reaction. She seemed startled and flustered, but she was quick to deny it. "No, it was me and some of the others. Devin was there, though." I looked closely at her. She tried to maintain my gaze, but her eyes kept darting away. There were probably 5 seconds of silence before I said, "Tell the truth." She said nothing, and this time, she just looked down. I saw a teardrop fall from her eyes. "It was just you and Devin, right?" Looking back, this was uncharacteristically relentless of me, but I think all the Devin stories had me on something of a mean streak. Looking back, I'm glad it came at that moment, because I might have let it slide otherwise and ended up musing about it for hours. She squeaked out a yes. "Okay, continue the story then," I said to her, but she didn't say anything because I had caught her in a lie. We just sat there in silence for a very long time, and I was extremely pissed, but I did my best to keep my composure and stay calm. After about 2 minutes of nothing but quiet, she finally apologized. "I'm sorry for lying. I knew it wouldn't be a good look to admit that I had a private conversation of that kind with him alone." She looked at me, but I kept a stone face. "But I swear we just talked. There was nothing else to it." "I don't think you did anything, unless you're banging in the broom closet at work. But I hate how you're bringing our private life to other people. I especially hate you bringing our private life to Devin, of all people." "Really?" So it was talking to Devin that could potentially break the sexual deadlock we've been sitting through in our marriage? You know what this looks like, right? I swear, he's like a brother to me. I've always said it, and I hate that you don't believe me. There's nothing between us, and talking to him about it was just like talking to a friend, or even like talking to a therapist or something. At this point, I realized I was shaking with rage because I could tell that my wife was slowly trying to turn this thing around against me. Suddenly, she was about to be the victim. I've had this happen during arguments with her, but before then, it had never been with something that pissed me off so much. So I told her, before you turn yourself into the victim here, it's fine. Keep having your sexual conversations with Devin, the brother who you have such deep interactions with. I'm actually interested in seeing how this unofficial sex therapist can help us out in the bedroom. And with that, I stood up and left the room. I slept on the couch that day. Now, I'm going to need to fast forward about a week. The next 2 days were a bit awkward, but we eventually got past it, and I didn't hear anything about Devin, which, for me, worked out beautifully. I knew she'd still be interacting with him since they worked together, but at least I didn't need to keep hearing about him, and that was enough for me, at least in that moment. I thought things were fine, and we were about to have things go back to normal. Until a week had passed from the day we had our big argument. So, a week from the big argument was yesterday. My wife came back home at night holding a plastic bag that I could tell had a long box in it. She seemed very apprehensive, but I could tell she was doing her best not to act too differently. This went on for probably about 30 minutes while she tried to make normal conversation, and I started to get impatient. But eventually, she sat down next to me, in the way she does when a serious conversation is about to be had. So, babe, remember what we talked about trying to get our bedroom life active again? I nodded. I decided to take a leap and get something that I thought might help us a lot in the bedroom. Or help me because I know I'm the issue. Then she pulled the box out of the plastic bag. It did not come in discreet packaging, so it was very clear it was a dildo. A big one. It was purple, and the graphics on the box made it obvious that the thing could vibrate. I'm not opposed to toys, to be honest. I think they can help out a lot more than they can harm the bedroom experience, at least when used tastefully. But my wife has always been vanilla, so this move was a bit of a shock to me. Then again, she claims she had such an enlightening conversation about intercourse with Devin. Obviously, my mind went back to that very annoying night, but I did my best to keep my emotions in check. My wife pulled the ridiculous purple plastic penis out of the box and held it as if it were made of glass. I kind of just looked at it because I had never needed to use toys in my previous relationships. My anatomy did the job well enough. But I understand how different everyone is, so some people, like my wife, need more motivation. I tried not to make the situation too awkward, since it seemed like she didn't know what to say either, so all I could mutter was, "Why do they have to make them so colorful?" She seemed relieved that I said something, and I think that relief was what made her slip up. I remember exactly how she said it. "I know, right? I don't know why Devin chose that color. Something closer to a skin tone would have been nicer." She had a smile on her face and kept looking at the stupid thing, but I could hear my blood pushing through my ears. It almost seemed like she didn't realize what she had just admitted to. Now, at this moment, I couldn't figure out whether I wanted to erupt at her or just keep what she had said close to my chest since she was unaware of the bombshell she had dropped. Being discreet wasn't possible though because I felt like my head was going to pop. "Devin bought you a dildo?" It came out a whole lot louder than I expected it to. She looked shocked and confused at first. Then, I assumed she played back the last minute in her mind, realized what she had let slip, and her eyes widened in fright. I stood up, shaking my head over and over, searching through my mind for the right words to say to her. "How does the person you claim is like a brother to you end up having deep sexual conversations with you and buying you toys?" It was hard for me to grasp. She said something, which I couldn't hear, and I calmly asked her to repeat it. I was hoping there was some kind of explanation or misunderstanding, but nope. What she said was, "I was going to buy one for us anyway, so it saved us some cash." There's a reason why I came out in a whisper, and that's because she knew how idiotic it sounded. I didn't even bother saying anything to that because she was in the phase of an argument where she senselessly tried to justify her actions. I've never felt worse at any recent point in my life than I did yesterday. I felt like there was a lot of aggression and negative energy that I needed to let loose, but I simply couldn't do it in any socially acceptable way. I wanted to interrogate her about Devin, but I knew she'd deny everything, especially while I was shaking with fury. So I just grabbed my car keys and my wallet and left the house. She gently tried to stop me once, but I glared at her and she backed off. I drove around town for hours in the night, and it helped to clear my head. I got a hotel room last night and extended my stay for tonight as well. I'm not certain whether I'll be going home tomorrow, but I decided to see if I can get some advice from all of you here. I have a strong feeling that she and Devin are effing, but I want solid proof. Let me know what you all think. I'll stick around in the comments for as long as I can. Edit, you guys don't need to convince me that she and Devin have some kind of thing going on. I'm not in denial. I just want to make sure that I have evidence in a way that is absolutely undeniable. It'll help me in more ways than one. Edit 2. Yeah, I probably should have kicked her out of the house instead of leaving myself, but I really couldn't be around her for as long as it would have taken her to pack a suitcase, so I think it was better that I took myself out. Edit 3. I saw a few suggestions that I check her phone, and I'm probably going to do that. But if I'm going to do that, it can't be right away because she'll still be on guard. However, a lot of your comments gave me ideas. So I think I'm going to see if I can get in contact with her coworkers that I'm friendliest with. It could backfire, especially if they are more loyal to her than me, but let's see. It sounds like your wife's bedside manner with Devin is a bit too cozy for comfort. And now she's bringing home souvenirs from their little talks. I hope she at least got a discount code for her infidelity kit. Nothing screams trustworthy relationship like your wife coming home with a gift from her work buddy Devin, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to spice up their love life with a colorful, vibrating accessory chosen by the third wheel in your marriage? If you're in the market for solid proof, why not hire a private investigator? Or, if you share a vehicle or your wife's phone has location services enabled, you could discreetly track her movements. Hey, ladies and gents, it's been a while, but I had to be really patient. I hope that you all were too. I have an update, and while that might be great news for all of you since it provides a very compelling continuation to my ordeal, it is very bittersweet for me. After about a week, I went back home. My wife apologized over and over, and she said she'd limit her interactions with Devin. I just nodded and nodded. I certainly wasn't over the situation, but I knew that I needed to be at home and on good terms with her to be able to learn the true extent of her relationship with Devin. It took an excessive amount of time for us to start being friendly with one another again. I made the risky decision to reach out to two of my wife's coworkers who knew me and who I felt would be the least likely to snitch on me. One was a guy that we'll call Rob, and the other was a lady we'll call Anna. I started with Rob because I hoped that since we're both men, he'd feel a degree of loyalty toward me and tell me the hard truth. I didn't have his phone number, and I couldn't show up at the workplace, but he was easy to find online. Shout out to LinkedIn for hooking me up. I sent him a message, explained who I was and how he knew me, and then we arranged to meet up at a bar for a few drinks. When we got there, I didn't jump straight into Devin talk because Devin is a coworker of his at the end of the day, but I simply mentioned that I felt some kind of way about the Devin dude. And I'd like to know what he had observed between the two of them. Rob seemed to silently calculate how much he wanted to tell me, but he eventually let me know that my wife and Devin were extremely close. He had no evidence that they had anything beyond being extremely close work friends, but he approved of my suspicion because he sort of felt the same way, even as a spectator. I thanked Rob for his help. Next up was Anna. Women tend to be a lot more privy to workplace gossip. But that was the exact reason why my meeting up with her to discuss two of her coworkers could be extremely risky. I felt like there was very little to lose, though, so I went for it. It was the next day when I met up with her in a public space. Anna was a rather pretty woman, so it made sense why she was one of the colleagues my wife usually complained about. It was probably just that girl-on-girl competitiveness we all know. My hope was that if my wife didn't like Anna, Anna probably didn't like my wife and she'd help me out. Your wife and Devin. She had a pained expression on her face. I don't know how much you know, but there's definitely something going on between the two of them. I really hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the buzz at the hospital is that they've been getting into it at work, for lack of a gentler way for me to say it. As Anna said that, I knew I was angry, but I also felt a sense of closure because I had finally been proven right. I wasn't crazy for thinking there was something between my wife and Devin. So I thanked Anna profusely and went back home that night. As my wife slept, I grabbed her phone and went straight for her messages. Her chat with Devin wasn't hard to find, and I scrolled and scrolled, but it was clean. In fact, it was a bit too clean for my liking. There was no talk about the toy, there was nothing even close to inappropriate in there. I even jumped into her email and some of the social media apps she used the most, but there wasn't anything to convince me that my wife had anything else going on with him. I started to feel crazy, like I may have blown the whole thing out of proportion. Well, That was all before I went through her gallery app. Initially, I didn't see anything of note. There were selfies, the sky and clouds on her drives home, food she'd eaten recently, and other boring things. At that moment, I felt like I had judged her very harshly, and just on a whim, I decided to check the trash folder on the phone. A literal sex tape. It had been deleted a few days back, but there was an actual sex tape in her trash, with what was clearly my wife in scrubs being railed from behind by another guy in a similar outfit. The environment seemed like some kind of room in a hospital, which would make sense. Their work romance was strictly a work romance, but it went as far as intercourse on the premises. I was furious. I had to watch an entire 5-minute video of my wife having sex with another man. I had really hoped that I would find nothing and my life would go back to normal. But that was the best outcome for a fool who wants to be blissfully ignorant, and that's never been me. So I sent the video over to my phone, removed any evidence that I had touched her phone, and stayed up the rest of the night. Coming up with a plan of action, I had the proof I needed, and all that was left was to make perfect use of it. In the morning, my wife went off to work, and I said goodbye to her, acting as normal as I could. As soon as she left, I brought out her suitcases and began packing her things. We've lived together for a very long time, so it was impossible for me to pack every single thing she owns in a relatively short amount of time, but I made sure to get most of her essentials. I aligned the 3 suitcases I had filled neatly by the door to our house. After that, I went to my laptop. I drafted a very long email to the hospital she worked at, citing my concern that employees at their facility were having sexual relations on the property. I talked about a lack of professionalism, ethical considerations, and sanitary concerns, as it looked like they did their business in an unoccupied patient room. I've been running my own businesses for years now, so I knew the right words to use to get the hospital very concerned about what was going on. I was even tempted to send the video to her family members, but I recognized early enough that would have been a step too far. I'd let them know what I found out, though, once my soon-to-be ex-wife was made aware herself. It took a lot of waiting, but night finally came, and my wife arrived back home. She walked into the house with a smile on her face, but it instantly dissolved as she saw her suitcases lined up by the door. I don't regret it, and it was in a whole move, but I couldn't help but say, surprise. Looking back, I'm glad that I gave in to that impulse. What's going on? She was in an instant panic, and I just looked at her. I asked her what she thought was going on, and all she could say was, "What did I do? You know what you did. You're going to have to leave right now. You can come another time to get the rest of your stuff, but not right now." She was dumbfounded, and I could see tears beginning to well up in her eyes. Save me the waterworks and go. I'm sure you'll have a cozy bed to sleep on back at Devin's place, so go there, though you might not be used to having sex with him outside of work at this point. She had started crying, and I had not a drop of pity in me. In fact, it was irritating to watch. So I walked toward the doorway where she was, picked up 2 of her suitcases, and took them to her car. I came back, met her standing there still bawling her eyes out, and took the last one. By the time I came back, she was standing on the outside of the doorway, and I unceremoniously closed the door behind her. It took almost 30 minutes, but I finally heard her car start up and drive away. She didn't need to know how I found out, but she couldn't play dumb when she knew I knew. Not too long after, I got a response from the hospital that the concerned individuals are no longer in our employ and were terminated based on a breach of medical ethics and professionalism. Both Devin and my soon-to-be ex-wife taken down in one fell swoop. Very satisfying. I've also started working with a really excellent divorce lawyer who told me it was great I saved the evidence I had found, as painful as it might have been to watch. I added all her family members to a group, let them know what I had found out about their sweet high-achieving doctor, and left the group. I'm too busy to deal with all of that drama. So, everyone, that's it. She'll be my ex-wife hopefully very soon, and as much as it hurts to have spent so many years of my life on something that ended up being so flimsy, I'm glad it ended sooner rather than later. I appreciate you all for supporting me on my initial post and sticking around for this eventual update. Have a nice life, everyone, because I know I'll be doing my damn best to do that. Well, congratulations are in order. It sounds like your wife and Devin have been very busy playing doctor in more ways than one. Who knew the hospital was offering such unconventional employee benefits? Kudos to you for your detective work. You've gone above and beyond to uncover the truth, even if it meant enduring an impromptu viewing of your wife's extracurricular activities. It's like winning the jackpot in a game of how not to trust your spouse. But hey, at least you've got closure, right? And now you can look forward to a bright future without the hassle of trying to trust someone who's been sneaking around like a teenager at a house party. Here's to moving on and finding someone who appreciates monogamy as much as you do. What do you make of this? What would you do if your partner came home with a special gift from a friend? Thank you for joining us today.
Story 3.
My partner and I have been married for almost 8 years, and we've been together for about 13 years. Our story began when I started dating her during her first year of grad school. I was completely attracted to her, no doubt about it. Interestingly, we were quite different. I'm introverted, outspoken, straightforward, and not exactly a charmer. On the other hand, she's very outgoing, easily influenced by others' opinions, and has a lot of energy. Initially, I didn't think she was shallow or fixated on others' opinions, but my perspective has changed over time. Early in our relationship, I found out that my future wife had a wild past. Many of her friends were people she had been physically close to, and she had a history of making out with almost every male friend she had. At that time, I thought, well, she's a young woman in college, so this is probably normal behavior. I never considered myself the jealous type and hadn't really experienced jealousy before. But that would change dramatically. In the first week of our relationship, she asked me not to call or visit her because her close friend Paul was coming to town and staying at her place. She wanted some alone time with someone she could relate to. I tried not to overthink it. Just because he was a guy didn't necessarily mean anything, right? However, this memory stuck with me because I would encounter Paul frequently, and I learned that my future wife, whom I'll call Camilla, had a romantic past with him. Moreover, their interactions in front of me were often intriguing. Camilla's stories were inconsistent, making it difficult to piece together the whole picture. According to her, she and Paul had mutual crushes while she was dating her first boyfriend. She claims to have had many partners, but only one boyfriend. The timeline of this relationship varies depending on her account. Sometimes she says they dated from her junior year of high school until her sophomore year of college, while other times she says they broke up during her freshman year of college. She has mentioned that she used him, the boyfriend, after they split, and their relationship was on and off. She also said that she and Paul acted like a couple at one point, but then he slept with one of her friends, although later she admitted that she had betrayed him first. I suspect she might have been involved with Paul while her boyfriend thought they were still together. I'm sharing this because I wonder if this pattern of behavior has repeated itself in our relationship. During the first 2 years of our dating, we went to bars quite often. Camilla was a self-proclaimed flirt and would often flirt with others, even in front of me. Not only did she flirt openly, but she also discussed her past experiences with former partners in great detail, often with me present. Besides Paul, she had an ongoing friends with benefits relationship with a guy I'll call James. As it turns out, James is genuinely a good person, and we're still friends today. However, back then, I couldn't stand him. He would regularly talk about his close moments with Camilla, even in front of both of us. It's tough to hear someone from your partner's past describe details. During those initial couple of years, several things bothered me. I'd often see her deeply engaged in conversation with someone new, not even bothering to greet me. She'd frequently find herself surrounded by a group of guys, making it impossible for me to chat with her for hours on end. Whenever Paul was around, he'd always sit as close to her as possible, and they'd be practically glued together. As he played video games, she'd serve him a bowl of MJ, even lighting it for him. She'd constantly interrupt me to pay attention to Paul's words. For a while, Paul was involved with our downstairs neighbor, but he'd always make a point to visit Camilla first. Once, her best friend came to see her, and she didn't want me around so she could have some one-on-one time with her friend, a female schoolmate. However, she ended up inviting her close buddy Michael and 4 other people. She repeated this on a night that was meant to be just for the girls. I wasn't allowed to call or drop by, yet she invited 4 guys, excluding me, to join their girls' night. I tried my best to let these things slide, but they became increasingly difficult to overlook. My anxiety and insecurity grew. I want to mention that I have a daughter, and I see her every other weekend. I went through a period of unemployment when finding a job was tough, and I fell behind on child support payments due to a recession. During this time, Camilla was interning, and I tried to stay in touch with her. Sadly, she seemed uninterested when I called, often chatting with her friends. One incident that really affected me was when I had to go to court for falling behind on payments. I narrowly avoided jail by making a deal with my daughter's mother. I had just gotten a job and needed 2 weeks to gather over $2,000, so I was stressed and had to borrow money. When I called Camilla for support, she was not only disinterested, but also busy eating Chipotle and chatting with her friends. There was no concern or empathy. A few weeks later, she went on a trip to an amusement park with her internship colleagues. Once again, she didn't want me to join, but I found out that others brought their partners. As I mentioned, these things add up and become hard to forget. She even attended a Christmas party with Paul, where she admitted he was flirting with her. Fast forward a year, she moves back home and we talked about moving in together. I received a small inheritance, allowing us to find a place, and I secured a job in her area. Finally, after almost 2.5 years of ignoring her thoughtless behavior, I confronted her about how much her flirting upset me. She recounted an incident at a local bar in my absence. In her narrative, she informed the bartender that she would consider getting involved if she were single. My discomfort was evident when I responded to her tale. In reaction, she erupted in anger, vehemently denying ever making such a statement, despite having just recounted it to me. It dawned on me that Camilla struggled to cope with criticism of her character and would react with intense fury when challenged. Simultaneously, Paul sent her a late-night text that I happened to observe, which read, "When do I get to see that fine backside again?" As time passed, things improved. We formed a tight-knit group of friends, and my daughter and Camilla grew closer. We had very few arguments, and everything was fantastic. Our circle of friends fell apart after about 3 years, but Camilla and I got engaged. Things remained pretty good between me, Camilla, my daughter, and our friendship with Carl and Lola. A few years later, we got married, with Carl officiating the ceremony. Another year passed, and things took a dark turn. Lola discovered Carl's infidelity, leading to their divorce. Naturally, Lola sought comfort from Camilla, but then came an unexpected twist. Lola embraced her midlife crisis, going out to bars and pursuing men like there was no tomorrow. The odd thing was that she insisted on taking my wife with her almost every other night as her wingwoman. During this period, my job required me to work long hours, sometimes from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m., 3 to 4 times a week. While I was at work, my wife was out socializing with guys. Her interest in being close with me was at an all-time low. She often claimed it was because she was tired, but she had plenty of energy for going out. On a certain occasion, she shared an incident where a bouncer flirted with her, and a bartender, encouraging the interaction, remarked that she must be there looking for something. During this event, I noticed her friendly connection with the bartender, whom we'll call Bob, on a visit to the bar together. On the night of her birthday celebration at the venue, she initiated a tight hug with him, almost leaping in his direction. Despite her later claim that he had hugged her, her high level of intoxication that night led to her falling flat on her face before reaching the bar. I, on the other hand, remained relatively sober throughout the evening. When I discussed this incident with one of Camilla's friends and simply mentioned Camilla and Bob, the friend had an emotional outburst, which seemed particularly suspicious to me. Later, an individual acquainted with my wife, who had hosted a party she attended, unexpectedly showed up at my workplace. Upon learning my address, he asked if I knew Camilla and her boyfriend Bob. Although it could be attributed to a possible mistake, the coincidence did not escape my notice. Moreover, there was a prevailing joke at the bar insinuating that Bob might be lacking in one aspect, but compensated in others. Later, Camilla confided in me about her dissatisfaction with a partner who was not well endowed, recounting a previous encounter with a man who was small, but good at other things. While I recognize the potential for overthinking, a sense of uncertainty continues to persist in my thoughts. During this time, another strange thing happened. Camilla and I had absolutely no physical contact for 2 months. Closeness had been an issue for years, but we still had occasional moments of closeness. During this period, there was nothing. Strangely, Camilla missed her period for a month and feared she might be pregnant. I couldn't help but wonder why she thought that was possible if she was only sleeping with me. When I brought it up, Camilla predictably lost her temper. After this, she started taking birth control, but our bed life remained stagnant. Around this time, we attended a family wedding. I remember that after the wedding, she was tipsy, and began talking about going dipping in the hotel pool. My dad and brothers went to bed, and so did I. I had been awake for at least 24 hours due to work. She ended up going with my cousin's husband while I lay down. I woke up 2 hours later, and she wasn't there. She was back by morning, but she claimed they didn't go dipping and that she returned right away, which I know isn't true. Later, Camilla went to Lola's house for a pool day, taking my daughter with her. One of our acquaintances, let's call him Keith, was there. Camilla told me that Keith and Lola were quite drunk, and Keith flirted with her in front of my daughter. When I mentioned this later, Camilla got upset because she was worried I would anger Lola and others who were there. It was then that I realized my wife cared more about the opinions of her social circle than mine. Eventually, the frequent outings, including on my days off without me, stopped when Lola met someone new and remarried. After that, Camilla hardly ever heard from Lola. To be completely honest, I began emotionally distancing myself and even trying to numb myself to the idea of my wife being with someone else. I even tried to make myself indifferent to closeness. All of this was causing me anxiety. I started having panic attacks, which she began to notice. The distancing, not the panic attacks. I told her about one I had while at her cousin's place during a Super Bowl party break. I had another one at my previous job, which resulted in me being sent to the hospital with extremely high blood pressure. I blacked out. Fast forward to the recent past, from 2020 until now. A lot has happened. I lost my job, went on unemployment, had my unemployment revoked, putting me in debt. I was accused of endangering someone at work, went to court, and ended up on probation. I spiraled into depression and anxiety, feeling paralyzed. I didn't even want to leave the house. I became short-tempered and unmotivated all during the pandemic. Meanwhile, Camilla started a new career and, being the extrovert she is, struggled with being cooped up indoors. Before the pandemic escalated, Camilla traveled to Florida for work training. One night, she visited a Caribbean club and was chased by one of the guests. Oddly, the chef came out to tell her how stunning she was. I found this strange because if the chef was in the back, how would he know to come out and compliment a random person's appearance? Maybe I'm overthinking it. Anyway, she called me once that night saying, "These guys are really making me want to smoke MJ." She called again, supposedly on her way home, when an unfamiliar voice started yelling into the phone. It was so loud that the person must have had their mouth right next to the receiver. She called back and told me it was the guy who pursued her. He was an Uber driver and had pulled over across the street to offer her a ride. That's what she told me while intoxicated. Sober, she claimed she bumped into him in person as she left the club, but that night, she said she was already outside, walking home. Both of us started therapy. As her departure approached, Camilla consistently stayed at work later. She attributed it to her workload, yet she had no problem leaving on time for social events like dinners, ball games, and other outings. I once went with her to a friend's house from work, remaining sober throughout. At one point, they became close, holding hands and gazing into each other's eyes. I'm sure of what I saw. This friend was a female co-worker who already had a boyfriend. Camilla began dedicating more time to working out and enhancing her appearance. She started coming home progressively later. I worked the 1 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift, and she often arrived home when I had only 4 to 5 hours left. One day, she attended a 5-hour book club when we hadn't seen each other, returning just when I needed to sleep. Any attempt to discuss it resulted in anger and yelling. When I vented, I faced criticism and harsh scolding, while she expected me to just listen, which I mostly did. However, there were times when my frustration boiled over and I snapped. Never physically, I would never damage her. The only topics she seemed interested in discussing were her fitness goals and her job. Her increasing criticism made me more silent and frustrated. All the frustration came to a head in a single incident. 2 years earlier, I became my daughter's primary guardian as her mom moved to Texas. Well, her mother waited until the last minute to book a flight, and the only days that didn't conflict with our work schedules were on weekends, particularly her schedule. Apparently, my daughter's mother couldn't find a direct weekend flight. Camilla found out about this and decided to contact her. Honestly, I didn't think it was our responsibility to arrange the flight. In fact, the custody agreement states that she's responsible for scheduling and covering travel expenses to and from Texas. Camilla didn't inform me about my daughter's mother's difficulty finding a weekend flight, or that she had reached out. Camilla also took it upon herself to agree on a midweek time to take my daughter to the airport. What she did tell me was that my daughter's mother had scheduled an early morning flight on a Wednesday. The airport is 2 hours away. She said the flight would leave by 7 a.m. at the latest, and she expected to be home by 10 a.m. at the latest. Assuming Camilla had taken the day off, I was under this impression. Camilla booked a hotel near the airport and asked if I wanted to join her. I had that night off. However, I hadn't slept in days, was extremely tired, and had a therapy session the next day at 11 a.m. Traffic around the airport can get heavy around 8, 9 a.m., and I was worried about missing my session, which was part of my probation. Missing it could lead to a contempt of court order. In reality, the flight was leaving at 6 a.m., I wasn't told this, and Camilla would be home by 8 a.m. But under the impression that she was planning to drive through heavy traffic after a 7 a.m. flight and be back by 10 a.m. at the latest, I thought it would be cutting it close. I declined to go with my wife to the hotel. When she asked again, sleep-deprived and annoyed at her constant disregard for my schedule and leaving paraphernalia everywhere, I snapped at her. She left angry, returned the next morning, and still went to work. She didn't take the day off and wouldn't call in sick. That night we talked, and she asked when we were last happy. I told her it was when she spent time with her cousin. The next weekend, she mentioned something inside her broke that night, and she didn't want to pretend anymore. She stated we shouldn't be together, and when I shared how long I'd been unhappy, it broke her heart. I asked if she knew why. She said no, and I explained much of what I wrote here, though not everything. She said she was going to her parents' house for a few days, then packed more things than I thought would fit in her parents' small home. I haven't seen her since. She didn't even personally discuss our situation with my daughter after returning, leaving her devastated. I can't say for sure, but I feel there was more to this. Maybe not, though. Perhaps it was a series of unfortunate coincidences caused by our differing personalities. Still, I can't shake the feeling that there's something else. Well, believe it or not, my wife confided in her friend about her trio party with her cousin and the bouncer I mentioned earlier. It's pretty obvious there was more than just makeup involved. And if that wasn't enough, she got caught red-handed texting her other lover right before she left. I wish I could say this is all just some made-up story, but it's not. I'm beyond furious, and it's consuming my thoughts non-stop. So I'm 38, and my wife and I separated 4 months ago because I found out she cheated on me. It really messed me up because she acted like our 13-year relationship was nothing. She even texted me 2 months ago, saying things shouldn't be abnormal just because we're not together anymore. I'm feeling pretty cynical about people in general now. Lately, I've been getting to know this amazing woman who's really kind and caring. I'm really into her, and she seems genuinely compassionate. I can tell she's interested in dating, but I'm torn. I keep wondering if it would be fair to her to pursue something while I'm still so fresh from my separation. What do you think? It's been 9 months since my wife left me, and some days I'm fine, but others are hard to deal with. She used to be sweet and loving, and we cuddled together on the couch. But now, she's acting like I don't even exist, and it hurts. Even after 9 months, it's challenging to forget those contrasting moments. I wish I could just forget like she has. It's crazy that after 13 years of marriage, she could just act like it was nothing. I'm not really looking for answers, just needed to express myself. Second story. While being in bed with my wife, she called out another man's name. When I asked her about it, she said it was just a friend. When I questioned her about this mystery guy, she insisted he was just a friend. However, something didn't feel right, so I looked into it and discovered she had been messaging him. When I confronted her, she tried to downplay it, claiming it was blown out of proportion. She did admit to drinking and talking to the guy, but said it was deeper than the messages. Apparently, she got upset seeing happy couples at a party we couldn't attend due to my work schedule, knowing I'm working hard to pay our bills and save for our future. According to my wife, she spotted her colleague James smoking and suddenly felt a strong urge to join him. While I don't mind her smoking, it's legal where we live. It's unusual since she's not a smoker. I can't help but wonder why she decided to strike up a conversation with him. She confessed to sharing her frustrations about our closeness with James. Closeness takes a back seat due to my demanding work schedule, and when it happens, it's standard as she's unwell, and I'm not that adventurous. James then asked her to join him upstairs. She got up to go, claiming she didn't intend anything inappropriate but wanted a private chat, then felt dizzy and began to fall. As she narrated her story, I sensed gaps in her tale. She admitted James caught her when she almost fell, but suddenly they were kissing? That didn't sit well with me. According to her, she felt guilty after a few seconds and told him she wasn't comfortable. I raised an eyebrow at her timeline, but she quickly corrected herself, saying it was only a few seconds, not minutes as she initially claimed. I'm unsure if I believe her. She explained feeling uncomfortable staying in the same room with James, so she found the homeowner and asked to lay down in a locked room with the purses. It didn't make sense to me. Why not just leave the party if she felt uncomfortable? She said she didn't want to leave because her friend, who was her ride, wasn't ready to go yet. Instead, she asked the homeowner to arrange someone to pick her up when her friend was leaving. The more she spoke, the more I realized her story had holes. Despite that, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt for now and pressed for more details. Supposedly, that's where the whole thing ended, and anything else this guy is saying is nonsense. Currently waiting for her friend's response to confirm if she was in that room at the end of the night, but I wouldn't put it past her girl power friends to cover for her. I told her I wanted to believe her version of events, and if it was just a kiss, I could forgive it, even though it made me feel sick and betrayed. But something about the story didn't add up, like why she didn't want to report it to her bosses at work to protect her own reputation. I understand, but it still made me suspicious. It's not that I think she's a liar or a cheat, but I need some time to process everything. I didn't even know we had problems in our marriage serious enough for her to confide in a stranger about them. I suggested to her that we go to couples counseling. She already sees a therapist on her own, but I'm not sure what they discuss because she's not very open about it. She told me that she thinks couples counseling could help us, especially since most of her sessions with her current therapist revolve around her nightmares, panic attacks, and fear of passing. It's been almost a year since she started seeing that therapist, and she still wakes up in the middle of the night crying. I let her know that I needed some time to think. It might sound a bit dramatic, but I took a sheet and hung it up in the living room to create a little private space behind it, where I set up my computer. I just need to be alone with my thoughts for a while. I'll give it a day or two to let everything sink in, and then I'll talk to her again after her appointment on Thursday. I don't know how long it'll take me to get over this, but every time I look at her, all I can think of is her vulnerable and wide-eyed in someone else's arms, and it just hurts. My mind's a mess, and I'm considering finding a therapist for myself, someone who can help me cope with the imminent loss of my wife, the love of my life. I'm barricaded in the living room, hiding behind a makeshift sheet barrier with my computer on the couch. It feels a bit like a child playing fort, but this is the only thing that feels right to me at the moment. She attempted to talk to me, to get me to come out from my hiding place, but I just couldn't face her. I need time to process all of this, to sort out my emotions and figure out what to do next. I'm lost, desperate for some guidance. If anyone out there can offer any help, any advice, I would be grateful beyond measure. Around 7 p.m., I left the house and walked aimlessly until I found myself in front of the liquor store. I ended up buying an average-sized bottle of tequila, and before I knew it, I had consumed a significant amount. Drinking isn't my usual go-to, and being slim, I quickly felt the effects of the drinks. By 9 p.m., I stumbled back home and tried to confront her. I was angry and intoxicated, and in a moment of rage, I gave her a gentle shove. Surprisingly, she responded by telling me to do it again, claiming that she wanted me to be mad. So I gave her another push, and she tried to kiss and touch me, leading to us engaging in some acts. The situation was consensual, but I wasn't comfortable with it. I only went along because it had been so long since she showed any interest. About 25 minutes into the act, she said the name James X. I asked her what was going on, and she looked at me and said, "I guess he made me say it so much I forgot." I'm currently secluded in my own little world. Tomorrow, I plan to tell her to leave. I know I'll be all right without her, and she'll be fine without me. I was abruptly awakened at 4 a.m. by a strong smell of marijuana in the apartment. My mind was foggy, but I had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. I stumbled towards the bedroom, hoping against hope that my wife hadn't been foolish enough to bring that man back to our home. However, As I entered the room, I found that most of her things, including her medications, clothes, TV, and computer, were gone. I desperately hoped that she had packed up and left on her own accord, but deep down, I knew that the reality was far from that. I went to the apartment office when it opened and asked to change the locks. She wasn't on the lease, and I wouldn't tolerate her showing up unannounced to cause trouble. The office agreed, and I felt relieved, knowing she couldn't just come in anymore. I texted her, saying she could get her stuff with her brothers or a friend, but that guy wasn't allowed in my apartment. Her response? The laughing so hard you're crying emoji. Typical. I can't deal with her immaturity right now. I headed to the apartment office early to discuss changing the locks. I explained she wasn't on the lease, and I didn't want any trouble if she came back to cause problems. Later, I texted her, telling her to bring her brothers or a friend when picking up her things, but the guy wasn't welcome. Her response was the laughing so hard you're crying emoji. It's like she doesn't grasp the seriousness, making me question if she's taking this seriously at all. Reflecting on last night, I wonder if she's having some kind of breakdown. Everything seemed deliberate. It doesn't make sense to say someone's full name during closeness unless you're weird or trying to make sure your boyfriend knows you said someone else's name, not just a misunderstanding. I called my boss, and surprisingly, he supported my decision, advising me to take some time off to clear my head. He even gave me a few days off, assuring me my job would be waiting when I'm ready to return. It's been months since I've had 2 consecutive days off, let alone 4. Going back to a life that doesn't revolve around her will be a challenge. I'm not even sure if I remember how to have fun anymore, but I'm optimistic about finding my way back to happiness. I've got to say, the fund was a smart move. It's almost entirely my hard-earned cash, maybe even all of it, but I'm not letting that go to waste. If things go smoothly, and she collects her things without a fuss, I plan to give her around $500 as a parting gift. After all, it was meant for her, right? But the rest of that sweet stash is all mine, baby. I might even treat myself to a little getaway using some of my vacation time. Time to leave all this drama behind and live a little. I'm not really worried about her. She's posted some vague messages on social media about how she thought her loved ones would be there for her during tough times. It's already filled with likes, sad emojis, and comments like, "Message me, girl," so she's getting all the support she needs. My mind is still reeling, and I'm trying to process everything that's happened. It may sound a bit over the top, but I'm seriously considering seeking counseling. I feel hurt and violated, and I don't think I can come to terms with it all on my own.
Story 4. I remember how my mornings used to start, each day feeling familiar, wrapped in the comfort of routine. For years, I worked hard to build my career and home life, convinced the future was clear. But that August morning, while preparing for another business trip, I had no idea everything was about to change. My name is Trent Giroux, lead field engineer at a major construction firm. Although my work kept me busy and engaged, life was about to take an unexpected turn. That week was like any other. I had an early Tuesday flight, meaning I'd be leaving my Atlanta home before sunrise. Even with the early hour, knowing my wife Reagan would be waiting at home brought me peace. Our marriage, full of cherished moments, was my anchor, or so I thought. On a Monday in early August, work had me preparing for another trip. As a lead field engineer overseeing design build projects, travel was part of the job, and a 7:21 a.m. flight from Hartsfield-Jackson was no exception. With Atlanta's notorious traffic, I planned a 4 a.m. wake-up, so I left the office early to get home. "Reagan, I'm back," I called as I stepped into the kitchen. Her car was in the garage, but there was no response. Heading upstairs, I heard the shower running and walked in, stepping behind her. "You scared me," she laughed, turning and wrapping her arms around me. The warm water in the moment pushed work and upcoming challenges out of my mind. For a while, nothing else mattered. Reagan leaned against me, and as the steam swirled around us, we shared a moment that felt like a promise, a grounding reassurance before the coming storm we didn't see approaching. The job in Baton Rouge was as difficult as I expected, keeping me busy from Tuesday afternoon through Wednesday. I worked with Etherly, the on-site project manager, and hoped he learned something from the experience, though we planned to monitor him more closely. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to New Orleans for a meeting on our project there. Mary Jo Bilecki, whom I'd helped train, was now leading the project, but was set to go on maternity leave soon. To ensure a smooth transition, I was checking that everything was in order for her team. As expected, Mary Jo had things well managed, so after dinner with her and her husband Ozzy and a team meeting Thursday morning, I headed to Louis Armstrong Airport and made it back to Atlanta by early afternoon. I briefed my boss, Mr. Strickland, on Baton Rouge, and praised Mary Jo's work. He approved my recommendations and suggested I take the rest of the day off after submitting my expense report. After finishing the report, I reached for my phone to text Reagan that I'd be home early when my best friend and coworker, Ethan Gardner, walked in and shut the door. "Hey, Trent, how was the trip?" he asked. "Long but productive," I replied. "I'm exhausted, but Mr. Strickland told me to take the afternoon off. I'm heading home to surprise Reagan." Ethan's expression grew serious. "Trent, wait. This isn't about work. I'm really sorry, but I need to tell you something about Reagan. She's been unfaithful while you've been traveling." The shock and anger at Ethan's words hit me hard. I refused to believe it. Reagan had shared her wild past before we got serious, but she had committed to our life together. I glared at Ethan, dismissing his claim as absurd. "That's not true, Ethan. You've crossed a line. Get out and think about our friendship before coming back." He looked distressed. "I know it's hard to hear, but I trust the source. I wouldn't tell you if I didn't believe it was true." I cut him off, my anger boiling. "Not another word, Ethan. Leave now before I make you—" Ethan, much smaller than me, knew I could back up my threat. He looked defeated as he turned and left. Ethan looked at me, eyes full of pain. "Trent, I'm really sorry. We've been best friends forever, so you know I'd never hurt you on purpose. Not telling you would be worse in the long run. I know your temper, remember? I've calmed you down plenty of times, kept you out of trouble back in high school. I wouldn't tell you this if I didn't believe it. Here's the name of the investigator my cousin used when he suspected his wife was unfaithful. She's good. If she confirms it, you'll know it's the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Ethan was right. We'd been close since childhood. Him, the calm, smart one. Me, the fiery athlete. We'd gone through everything together, even worked at the same company for 6 years. Though I didn't believe his claim for a second, I realized he must have thought he was protecting me. "Your cousin's wife, was it true?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, and Miss Hightower proved it. He divorced her, but they still swapped the kids. He'd do anything for them, though he hates her now. I'm really sorry, man." He left, closing the door behind him. Alone, I processed what he'd said, my thoughts shifting to his cousin's situation. I felt for the kids in that mess. Reagan and I had been talking about having children soon, hoping for a boy and a girl. The idea of betrayal felt impossible. I sat there, gathering myself before heading home. The accusation lingered, irritating and persistent. No, I didn't believe it, not for a second. But as I drove home, I decided not to mention it to Reagan. It was too outrageous to bring up without evidence, and would only upset her. After a quick stop at the store, I arrived home. Reagan greeted me with excitement, rushing into my arms. "You're home early," I said, just before she kissed me deeply. "I planned to be here to welcome you," she said, eyes shining. "I missed you, Trent." In an instant, we were lost in each other, her warmth melting away the tension that had built since Ethan's visit. I needed to be close to my wife, to find comfort in her embrace. I gently pulled her up, and she understood, standing up and turning a chair around. She dropped her skirt, revealing she wasn't wearing anything underneath, and positioned herself over the chair, bracing on the table. "Be with me, Trent," she whispered. I pressed against her before moving closer. Her soft encouragement spurred me on as she found her own moment of bliss. Soon, I reached my peak as she trembled and relaxed, leaning against the chair. She caught her breath and left for the nearby bathroom, grinning as she went. Watching her, I felt reassured and thought about how false Ethan's claims were. Reagan loved me, and I knew she'd never betray me. I shook off his story and focused on the present. That evening, we shared an intimate moment, starting with gentle affection that built into deeper closeness. As Reagan drifted off to sleep with a peaceful smile, I lay awake, reflecting on what Ethan had said. Despite our long friendship, I knew he wouldn't have brought it up unless he truly believed it. Unable to focus on my book, my thoughts were consumed by the situation. With Reagan's affection fresh in my mind, I knew the accusations were baseless. I decided that to settle the matter, I needed to prove it false, for both my peace of mind and to preserve my friendship with Ethan. The next morning, I contacted Donna Hightower's office and booked an appointment for Monday afternoon. I kept a separate investment account for surprises and gifts, so I planned to use it to hire her without Reagan knowing. This way, the unfounded rumor would be put to rest. At my Monday appointment, I was greeted by Miss Hightower, a poised and sharp former APD officer. She projected confidence and took in every detail as we shook hands. "Good afternoon, Mr. Giroux." "How can I help you?" she asked, her keen eyes assessing me. "Thanks for seeing me, Miss Hightower. I'm Trent Giroux. I travel for work several times a month, and someone has spread a rumor that my wife is unfaithful. I need you to confirm she's been faithful, so I can put this to rest." She began asking questions without expression, and as I shared what I knew about the accusation and details about Reagan, I realized the issue might be more complex than I thought. Her questions were insightful, with follow-ups that helped clarify information, especially about Reagan's past. When she finally set down her pen, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Giroux. I see from your client sheet that you have engineering degrees from Georgia Tech. How familiar are you with philosophy or the burden of proof in the legal system?" I was caught off guard. I took an intro philosophy course and have testified in a few cases, but I'm not deeply familiar. She nodded. "You're asking me to prove your wife hasn't been unfaithful. That's called proving a negative. While it's possible to prove certain negatives, like an intact wine glass that's never broken, proving continuous behavior over time is nearly impossible." She paused, then added, "For example, I could prove I didn't commit a crime yesterday with an alibi, but proving I didn't do something years ago is much harder. Applied to your case, we could monitor your wife for a week or month and provide evidence of her current behavior, but we can't guarantee what happened in the past. However, we might uncover evidence if there were past incidents. If you're okay with this, we'll take your case." Understanding her point, I agreed to hire Hightower Private Investigation Services. I spent a few more hours with an investigator going over details and planning for the right circumstances. Working from my Atlanta office all week, I set up a plan on Saturday night by tripping a circuit breaker in the basement. Sunday morning was normal, but after church and lunch with new friends, we returned home to find the upstairs warmer. Reagan immediately noticed, and I said I'd check the breaker. After flipping a few switches and returning upstairs, I said, "I didn't find anything wrong. I'll call the HVAC service." "Please do. It'll be too hot to sleep up there tonight." I called our HVAC company, navigating their automated system for a while before hanging up. Then I called the contact Donna Hightower provided. "Hi, this is Trent Giroux. Our upstairs AC isn't working. Can someone come out tomorrow at 10? Great. See you then." Reagan heard the end of the call and said, "It's too hot, so we're sleeping in the guest room tonight, like a hotel stay," she added with a grin. That night, we shared a close moment, and I felt reassured. There was no way Reagan's love for me could coexist with the rumors Ethan had mentioned. The next morning, Reagan asked me to dance the sheets for the laundry as I headed to the shower. I worked from home Monday morning and met the HVAC technician, a subcontractor from Hightower Private Investigation Services, at 10 as planned. I showed him around, then turned the circuit breaker back on. An hour later, he finished. "These motion-activated cameras stay on for 5 minutes and are well hidden with wide-angle lenses. They'll capture clear footage, suitable for legal purposes," he said. He installed cameras in key areas, ensuring any activity would be recorded. I paid for the installation and 2-week rental before heading to work. When I returned home, the house was cool. "Reagan, I need to add a stop in Orlando to this week's trip," I said. I was already heading to Tampa on Tuesday, and now I'd return late Friday. "I'll try for an earlier flight, but it doesn't look promising." Reagan smiled. "I'll miss you, but let's make the most of tonight." She led me to the couch, and soon we were caught up in each other, laughing and sharing kisses. She straddled me, moving with confidence and passion, and I knew she was mine alone. Later, as she leaned into me and whispered, "I love you, Trent," I felt reassured. I replied, "I love you too," and meant it. She headed to the bathroom, and I quickly cleaned up, feeling grateful for what we shared. The Tampa meetings went well, and the Orlando issues were straightforward. My visit reinforced oversight and showed support for the team. After resolving everything, I stayed to review the site with the assistant project manager, noting he had potential for growth. Though I could have left Thursday, I stayed to allow time for the surveillance to continue. I worked in my hotel room, then visited a local shooting range, opting for pistol practice while other visitors indulged in flashier activities. On Friday, I worked at the job site until it was time to leave for the airport. Traffic on I-285 and I-75 was heavy, but I felt relieved when I finally reached my exit. Reagan greeted me with excitement, sensing my stress, and handing me a beer before we relaxed and talked on the couch. Later, she led me upstairs, and we shared a tender moment, making up for the days we had been apart. Saturday morning, Reagan went to the gym while I did yard work. Taking a break inside, I checked my email, relieved to find nothing from Donna Hightower's investigator. On Sunday, while Reagan was running errands, I checked again and found an unexpected email. "Dear Mr. Giroux, Your order will be ready Monday at 11 a.m. Please contact our office to arrange delivery. Larson Toolworks. My hands trembled as I deleted the message. When Reagan returned home, she noticed my unease, and I claimed I wasn't feeling well. She hugged me and suggested I rest while she prepared dinner, but I couldn't shake my worry, noticing an unfamiliar floral scent in her hair. Unable to sleep well, I woke early Monday. The floral scent different from her usual products, and the email left me questioning everything. I rationalized it as just perfume from the store, but doubts remained. At 11 a.m., I arrived at Miss Hightower's office. She greeted me and said, "Mr. Giroux, we finished our investigation early, and I have bad news." She handed me a file. Skipping the report, I flipped straight to the photos. There was Reagan, with another man, in our bedroom. More photos followed, one showing them in the backseat of a car and another series outside a hotel. I noticed inconsistencies. "This man doesn't look like the first one," Miss Hightower explained. "We documented 4 encounters with 3 different men, ending with a repeat on Sunday at a private home." "Sunday?" "She said she was shopping," I muttered. "She did some shopping on Saturday after her second encounter, but only went to the grocery store on Sunday," she replied, suggesting I check receipts or credit card records. "She said she was at the gym Saturday," I said, still trying to process the news. "She was not at the gym," Miss Hightower said. "I'm sorry, Mr. Giroux. How could this happen? 3 different men in a week?" I said, anger overtaking disbelief. "I'm not a psychiatrist," Miss Hightower said gently, "but your wife might have a condition related to compulsive behavior. She seems to seek out these encounters, driven by a need beyond the norm and going to lengths to cover her tracks." "The flowers," I whispered, remembering the scent in Reagan's hair. "She must have showered after meeting him yesterday." "Maybe, or just a quick rinse or spritz," Miss Hightower said. "From our surveillance and video feeds, it's clear she's meticulous about hiding the evidence. She even changes the sheets after encounters. Many cheaters get caught by a telltale stain or scent." "In our bed?" I asked, recalling her changing the guest bed sheets after our recent night together. "Yes, 2 of the 3 nights you were gone. She brought him to your home," she continued. "Don't call them that, they're just cheaters." She nodded. "One of them is married. The second man is her regular partner, your wife's supervisor, Noah Woollever. He's 32, married, and recently became her manager. We identified him through surveillance and DMV records after seeing him leave your house." "That jerk," I muttered, recognizing his face in the file. "Reagan pointed him out once when I picked her up from work." "Not social with spouses, I bet," she said. "He met her at a bar Wednesday, came to your home, and then they met at a hotel Saturday and at his house on Sunday. If his wife had come home minutes earlier, Reagan's affair would have been exposed." "Her game's already over," I said, bitterness in my voice. "I was wild in my youth, but I wanted more and met Reagan when I was ready to settle down. She claimed she did too." Miss Hightower touched my hand. "I'm sorry this turned out this way, but I must warn you. Don't let this pain push you to act out of character. Retaliation can ruin your life. Losing your job, facing jail, or worse. Don't let that be your story. Remember, this is her mistake, not yours." Her words sunk in as I nodded, gripping the reality of what lay ahead. My mind was racing with thoughts. The cheating was confirmed. Kids? Not now. Revenge? Maybe not, but payback? Absolutely. I resolved to stay calm and strategic, as calculated and relentless as Reagan had been in deceiving me. I wasn't the kind to hurt someone physically, but I would make sure she felt the pain she had caused. "I'll be careful, Miss Hightower, but trust me, my soon-to-be ex-wife will feel the consequences," I said. She sighed, knowing she couldn't change my mind. "Please remember, Trent, not to cross the line. The consequences could be severe." Miss Hightower referred me to George C. Godwin, a seasoned divorce attorney. We met after hours, and I spent time planning in Piedmont Park before meeting him. George was a jovial, experienced lawyer who knew the Georgia legal system well. He reviewed the file and flash drive I handed over, impressed by the thoroughness of Miss Hightower's work. "I'll have everything ready by next Monday," he assured me, warning me to tread carefully as appearances matter in court. I returned home late Monday, citing exhaustion. Avoiding intimacy, I kept my distance from Reagan, though I agreed to a brief encounter that left me feeling detached. She laughed when things got messy, but it only reminded me of her betrayal. I showered, trying to wash away my disgust. Early Tuesday, I left quietly for my flight to Charlotte. On Thursday, I called Ethan. "Ethan, you were right. I'm sorry. She played me." He forgave me instantly and offered his help. I delayed coming home Friday, claiming tiredness to avoid Reagan's advances. She attempted to entice me, but I declined, choosing instead to watch her, noting how her behavior seemed fit for a career in adult content. My anger and disgust kept me in control. Saturday, I visited my parents under the pretense of helping with a home project. I wanted to tell them everything, but knew it was best to wait until everything was finalized. The time for full disclosure would come soon enough. On Saturday afternoon, I called Reagan to say I wouldn't be home until Sunday, sensing she might not be alone. I kept my tone neutral, ending with a forced, "Love you." On Sunday, while she was out, likely seeing someone, Mr. Godwin texted to confirm that the papers would be served at 11 a.m. Monday, and I took a personal day. I left a note for Reagan about a work commitment and spent the evening at my office finalizing plans. Reagan called twice, and I assured her I'd be late, but promised an early return Monday afternoon to spend time together. Her mood brightened, and she told me she loved me. I knew it was a lie, but given her deceit, I thought, turnabout is fair play. When I slipped into bed late that night, she barely stirred. Monday morning took an unexpected turn when Reagan woke me with affection and climbed on top of me. "God, Trent, I've needed this," she said, moving rhythmically. Pushing her off would ruin my plan, so I let her finish while holding back my own emotions. When I was close, I flipped her over and finished without fully engaging, feeling satisfaction mixed with pain. After she left for work, I marked my belongings with painter's tape. Items I owned before our marriage were clearly identified. Community property was left behind for the settlement or to donate. By 7:45, Ethan and movers arrived. Ethan took over while I packed the essentials. I'd already moved my tool-safe contents to my parents' house on Saturday. Amy, our neighbor and Reagan's friend, saw the moving truck and asked if we were moving. I intercepted her. "Shh," I said with a smile. "It's a surprise for our anniversary. New furniture. Please keep it quiet until Reagan mentions it." She agreed, and I was relieved. By 9 a.m., I was at the bank, withdrawing half of our joint funds as a cashier's check, which I deposited into a new credit union account. At 10:45, I parked in Sandy Springs and closed our joint credit card after ensuring a zero balance. Just as I finished at 10:57, a text confirmed the papers had been served at 11 a.m., right on schedule. Process server. Just asked for her. Receptionist said she's on her way. A minute later, another text came through. Process server. She's in the lobby now. Feeling nervous, I sent the prepared email to our friends and family, announcing the divorce and including photos showing Reagan and her boss, Noah, together. Heeding warnings from my attorney and Miss Hightower, the images were edited to blur explicit details while keeping their identities clear. Reagan and Noah weren't included in the message. They'd find out soon enough. I hit send, confirmed it went through, and put my laptop away. My phone rang at 11:03. It was Reagan. "Trent, what is this? Divorce? Why? I thought we were happy. Did you find someone else?" I laughed. "You thought we were happy?" "I did, until I discovered the truth. Check the back of the envelope from the attorney." I heard her panic, swearing and pleading over the phone. "It's not what it looks like, Trent." "Really? That's not your boss in our bed? We're done. Contact my attorney if you need anything." I hung up as she kept shouting, then blocked her number after receiving voicemails and texts filled with lies and excuses. I didn't listen, deleting everything without a second thought. Next, I called my father-in-law, Bob. "Hi, Bob. Sorry to call at work, but you need to hear this directly. Reagan has broken her vows, and I filed for divorce." "Trent, no. She's changed. You can't be serious." "I wouldn't do this lightly. She relapsed recently. I have proof, dates, times, photos, and videos." "It's over, Bob. I'm sorry, but the papers were served this morning." "I can't believe it. She promised she was past that." "She promised us all. If she'd stayed true, I'd have loved her forever. But it's too late now. I still care about you and Chessie, which is why I'm telling you directly." Bob expressed deep regret. We said goodbye, voices heavy with sadness. I left Chessie a voicemail knowing she'd soon hear the news from Bob. At 11:16 a.m., I faced the toughest part of my plan. Acting on it meant hurting someone who probably didn't deserve it, but avoiding it could lead to worse outcomes. Wearing sunglasses, a cap, and a fake delivery lanyard with Ethan's number, I headed inside. He was ready to answer as Sunshine Process Serving. At the security desk, I introduced myself and stated I had a package for Mrs. Melissa Woolaver. The guard initially directed me to receiving, but I insisted, quoting legal requirements for a personal signature. He relented after checking my ID, giving me a visitor's badge with strict instructions to return it. On the third floor, I repeated my routine at her firm's reception. The receptionist hesitated but called Mrs. Woolaver. I discarded my gum and cap before meeting her. Melissa, in her late 20s or early 30s, looked uneasy as she approached. "You have something for me to sign?" she asked. "No, but I need to give you this." I said quietly, handing her a photo showing her husband with my wife. "There's more proof in this envelope." Tears welled as she whispered, "This has to be fake. Noah promised." "It's real, Mrs. Woollever. A private investigation confirmed it. The envelope contains documents, photos, and video, all verified and legally obtained." She shook her head, crying. "He said it was a mistake before, that it wouldn't happen again. It wasn't just a moment of weakness this time. There are records of 3 meetings in 5 days." She clutched my shirt, processing the betrayal. Wiping her tears, she looked up. "Mr. Giroux, was it? Let's go somewhere. I want to send him a picture to show him." "Mrs. Woollever, I appreciate the offer, but no," I said, holding her gently. "Acting in anger won't help. You need to think ahead and avoid decisions you'll regret. And you don't want to risk complications with the law." Melissa seemed to snap out of her grief, stepping back. "You're right. I gave him a chance, but this is it. We'll go to court, but I don't know how." I included the private investigator's contact info and a recommended attorney's name. He's been very responsive in my case and filed the papers today. She took the envelope, thanked me, and then asked, "Can I call you if I need advice? My number's inside." After visiting the testing lab recommended by Donna Hightower, I anxiously managed a project in South Georgia, worried about potential health risks. Thankfully, by week's end, the lab confirmed I was clear of any STDs. The relief helped calm some of my anger toward Reagan. Reagan continued to leave voicemails on both my work and personal phones, even using different numbers. I deleted them without listening. When I returned to the office on Friday, I found more messages waiting and decided to block her number permanently. I also visited my parents that weekend, where I blocked her number on their phone as well. My mom, emotional and hopeful, asked me to reconsider, but I showed her a dated photo. Tearfully, she finally understood. On Saturday, Andy Smith rushed into my office with news that Mary Jo Bilecki's water had broken early. Originally meant to take over her project after her leave, Andy was unprepared as his current project wasn't complete. After reviewing schedules, we proposed that I take over the New Orleans job, staying available for major issues on other projects, including Baton Rouge. That evening, we learned Mary Jo and her twins were stable. I drove to New Orleans, distancing myself from Reagan and focusing on work. Early the next day, I reviewed the project, met subcontractors, and planned ahead. I later visited Mary Jo at the hospital, bringing a note of thanks and a gift certificate for the twins in NICU. Seeing her joy made me reflect on the likelihood of not having children of my own, which stung. Work consumed me for days, and on Friday, I invited the construction office staff for drinks in the French Quarter. On Monday, George Godwin called with a divorce update, mentioning Reagan's increasingly frantic calls to his office. "Are you sure you don't want to talk to her?" he asked. I laughed dryly, hearing his chuckle on the line. I thanked him and returned to work. When I reached my hotel room that evening, there was a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, Trent. My attorney filed today and Noah has been served. Can we talk? Thanks, Melissa W." I replied to see if she was still awake, and my phone rang almost immediately. "Hi, Trent. Thanks for taking my call." "No problem, Melissa. How are things?" "Tough, but I'll manage. How about you?" "Similar. What's going on, Melissa?" I asked. After a pause, she said, "I wanted to thank you for exposing Noah's betrayal and for stopping me from making a mistake when I was vulnerable. You could have taken advantage, but you didn't. It made me realize how wrong it would have been. I appreciate it. This will be hard, but I'll get through it. Melissa, we were both in a difficult spot and it wouldn't have been right. I'm glad you're determined to move forward." "Still a long way to go, but it's better now," she said. I almost offered to be there if she needed to talk, but decided against it. Noah was her issue, not mine, and I had my own plans for dealing with him. We wished each other well and said goodbye. Work in New Orleans was going well, but I was also overseeing the Baton Rouge project, which kept me busy. Mr. Strickland's directives made it feel like I was constantly in over my head. George called a few weeks later with news. "Reagan's lawyer wants court-mandated counseling. If the judge approves, you'll need to attend sessions in Atlanta. What's your call?" Angry but prepared, I said, "We've kept some of the stronger evidence back. If the judge sees it, would it help?" "We'd share it with her attorney and it could make the judge quash the request," George said. "Warn the judge and do it," I replied. A week later, counseling was denied, though the judge suggested Reagan seek therapy for her issues. One problem was handled. During the months of legal battles, I kept a low profile and updated my will and life insurance to ensure Reagan received nothing if anything happened to me. I visited Mary Jo and Ozzy when their twins were out of the hospital, even babysitting one night, which left me hoping for only one child at a time if I ever had kids. Melissa checked in occasionally to ask about my case, indirectly seeking encouragement for her own. Due to legal concerns and personal morals, I kept our interactions strictly supportive. Eventually, her messages stopped as her case progressed. As Mary Jo's return approached, I found a home in Dunwoody, using pre-marriage funds for the down payment. After months at an extended stay hotel, I was ready for a more settled space and to get my belongings out of storage. Mary Jo resumed work, and the twins were thriving. As I handed the project back to her, I left New Orleans with a few lingering regrets. My first regret was that, with no upcoming projects in New Orleans, Mary Jo would be leaving the firm to be a stay-at-home mom. Ozzy secured a position as an associate professor at Loyola, which wasn't surprising. MJ asked me to keep her in mind for future work in the area, and I agreed. Second, returning to Atlanta meant saying goodbye to my unofficial godchildren and babysitting for MJ and Ozzy. I knew I'd miss the time spent with the twins, a painful reminder of my own childless state, thanks to Reagan's betrayal. Lastly, Reagan continued to fight over divorce details, dragging the process out. George assured me that Judge Johnson was losing patience and that it would end soon. Back in Atlanta, I moved into my new house and spent a week unpacking and meeting neighbors, including a friendly divorcee named Noelle. I thanked her for the brownies, but politely declined a dinner invitation to avoid any issues with the ongoing divorce. Ethan, who didn't understand the legal complications, asked when I'd start dating again. When the judge finalizes the divorce, and I'm sure nothing jeopardizes the settlement, I said. Still planning payback? He asked. I nodded. She'll get what she deserves when the time is right. Judge Johnson grew tired of Reagan's delays and summoned us both for final statements in early April. I arrived early, and Reagan approached me. Trent, it didn't have to be this way. It did, Reagan, because you broke our vows. You were gone so much. Don't use that excuse. You knew the travel involved when you married me, and I always made up for it. Not that it mattered when you slept with your boss and others during my last trip. Her face turned angry, tears streaming. Trent, I had needs. I knew her history, always seeking pleasure like a fix, but I'd believed her promises to change. I gave you everything, including the best stimulator money could buy. You used to say I was the best ever before and after my trips. Realizing people were watching, she said, Can we talk privately? No, we discussed this before marriage. You said your wild days were over. You failed at marriage and everything else. If you can't accept that, maybe a new therapist can help more than the last. Her face fell as more people watched. I walked away when George arrived, leaving her in tears. Inside the courtroom, Judge Johnson ensured we signed the paperwork to prevent further delays. Reagan erupted into an outburst, but was silenced by the judge, who then finalized the proceedings. The gavel fell, ending our 5-year marriage. I thanked George after Judge Johnson left the courtroom. As I turned to go, Reagan approached, pleading. Ignoring her, I kept walking, and her tone turned angry, shouting obscenities. Despite knowing better, she lost control. I didn't see if she was arrested as George and I quietly left. We had already had our conversation, and I had no interest in speaking to her again. The next day, George filed for a restraining order, which Judge Johnson approved. This ensured Reagan stayed out of my life. If she violated it, a brief jail stay might have taught her a lesson, but she stayed away, and I began to move on. That weekend, I called Noelle to redeem our rain check. Although we had a fun evening, it was clear we didn't share much beyond attraction. We spent the night together, but she confirmed she wasn't looking for anything serious. We parted as friendly neighbors. I dated others in the weeks that followed, but despite the moments of fun, I realized I was still searching for a meaningful connection, a partner for life. By Independence Day, visiting my parents and seeing my sister's family made me reflect. My mom, perceptive as ever, gently reminded me that I needed to find someone serious if I wanted a family. In late July, I got a text from Melissa Wooliver, which surprised me. After finishing some chores, I replied, and she called shortly after. Hi, Trent. Thanks for taking my call. No problem, Melissa. How have you been? It's been a while, and I wasn't sure you'd want to talk after everything. I chuckled. Unless you were involved with my ex-wife and your husband. Ex-husband as of today, she interrupted. Then I don't blame you for their mess. So what's up? I am officially free now and wanted to thank you. You exposed the truth and gave me advice that saved me time and money. I didn't use your lawyer, but your help meant a lot. Glad I could help. Don't worry about it. It's hard not to, Trent. You were an inspiration when I was at my lowest. I don't know you well, but I appreciate what I've seen. Would you like to have dinner with me? Dinner with Melissa was lovely, but my focus wasn't on the food. It was on her. She was sweet and beautiful, and I couldn't help but think how foolish her ex-husband had been. Reagan had once been stunning too, but her betrayal had erased any of that appeal for me. "You're staring," Melissa said with a grin. I laughed. "It's easy when you're looking at someone worth it." She blushed and asked, "Want to get out of here and go to my place?" "I'd like that." We left the restaurant, and as soon as we reached my SUV, Melissa pulled me close, kissing me deeply. Her touch made my intentions clear. "Please, Trent, get me home," she whispered urgently. I parked in her garage, and we barely made it inside before we were kissing again. Melissa tugged at my belt, and I suggested, "Inside?" "Yes, inside." "I need you now," she moaned. I carried her in, and she led me to her room while we kept kissing. Clothes came off quickly. I kissed her soft skin, which made her cry out in pleasure. As we continued, she climaxed, moaning with her dress pulled up and my pants unzipped. I teased her a bit before finally pulling them down, and she kicked them away. She helped lower my boxer briefs, and my arousal was clear. She took a protection from me, rolled it on, and lay back with anticipation. Positioning myself over her, I slid inside slowly. Melissa moaned, "Now, Trent, make love to me," and I did, savoring every moment. Our first time together was slow and rhythmic. I watched Melissa's face, seeing her anticipation and focus as we moved in sync. Her arms and legs wrapped around me, urging me deeper. Her moans matched our movements, growing faster as her climax neared. I felt my own build, intensifying as we reached the edge. She fought it, eyes shut tight, until she finally let go with a groan. Her release triggered mine, and I finished with her, as her body quivered. I leaned over her, careful not to press down too much. We exchanged a soft kiss, and when our eyes met, her smile was full of joy and contentment. "Trent, I've wanted this since the day you first came to my office. It was even better than I imagined," she said. Her words made the moment even sweeter. I realized I needed to take care of the protection before any risk arose. "You're amazing," I whispered, "but I need to take care of this." She nodded, smiling as I got up. Moments later, she was heading to the bathroom, her toned body highlighted by the soft light. We stayed in bed that night, pausing only for water or quick trips to the bathroom. We made love 2 more times before falling asleep, and again in the morning. Thankfully, it was Saturday, and I had no work obligations. Melissa, so reserved in daily life, had been both fierce and tender in bed. After our morning session, she dozed off, and I slipped out to the bathroom. Morning light illuminated the room, letting me take in the scattered clothes and the queen bed surrounded by pillows we'd knocked to the floor. I picked one up, smiling at how we'd used them during the night. As I glanced at her dresser, a series of photos caught my eye. One image made me pause, so I picked it up. "Trent, what are you doing?" Melissa asked from the bed. "Who's the little girl in these pictures?" I asked. "That's my daughter, Ansley. She's 3 and means everything to me." "You never mentioned her," I said, surprised. "I kept her out of the mess with Noah to protect her. She was the main issue in the divorce, which is why it took so long. I don't want you to meet her unless we're serious. Where is she now?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "She's with him this weekend." "Why? Is something wrong?" "I like you, Melissa. I really do, more than I should for how long we've known each other. But your ex-husband is one of the few people I dislike as much as my ex-wife. If we get serious, I'd want to be part of your daughter's life. But who else would be there at her events?" "Noah," she whispered, understanding. "He's awful, but he does love her." "Exactly. Every time I see him at any event for Ansley, it will remind me of what he did with my ex and how he contributed to my marriage ending. I'd resent him, and Ansley, even if she didn't understand, would feel that tension. She'd eventually come to resent me, damaging any bond we could have and, in turn, hurting our relationship. It pains me to say this, but it would eventually break us apart." Melissa sat up, clutching the sheet, and whispered, "So, there's no future for us. As much as I wish I could be proven wrong, no, I don't think there is," I said. Tears fell as she nodded. "I thought this was too perfect. Now I know it was. Please, Trent, just go." She touched her phone, adding, "The garage door is open." She lay back, crying as I grabbed my clothes and dressed in the hallway, hating myself as much as her ex. It hurt, but I knew it was true. I visited my parents that day, giving them a brief, edited version. They saw I was hurting more than I let on. Mom, ever supportive, hugged me and assured me things would be okay, though I struggled to believe it. On Sunday after church, we met my sister and her family for lunch. While waiting for a table, she pulled me aside and made me talk. I shared most of it, leaving out the intimate details. "That's tough," she said, "but you won't know if it could work unless you try. One date isn't enough to judge. If you continue, you might find it's worth the fight." Thanks, sis, you're right, but that one date was enough to show me how painful it could be if it failed. Little brother, you won't know unless you try. I agreed to think about it. We didn't discuss it further, but it stayed with me. Ethan, who understood me well, supported my decision, but on the drive back from a plant site in LaGrange, I questioned whether his agreement was wise, given his track record with relationships. He set us up with 2 women the next weekend, and while it was fun, I pushed the thoughts aside. During the divorce, Reagan wanted to keep our house, but I had George push for a sale, since she couldn't afford the buyout without giving up other assets. It was a bit harsh, but I felt it was justified and didn't lose sleep over it. George also handled the house sale. He learned Reagan was buying a condo, and soon after, I heard rumors that she and Noah were getting married. I called George since it would affect my finances. He had argued against support during the divorce since Reagan was at fault, but the judge still awarded her a small amount for 5 years, or until she remarried. I'll check into it and let you know. If it's true, we'll stop the payments, George said. Yeah, and if it's true, some people never learn, I said, realizing how their marriage validated my decision about Melissa. Nope, George chuckled. That's what keeps me in business. And I thought, maybe it opened up an option I had considered early in my divorce, but never thought would happen. When I heard about their marriage, I reached out to a friend at Reagan's firm. Will Kleiner and I had been college acquaintances and reconnected when I started dating Reagan, discovering he worked in a different department there. Reagan and I had spent time with Will and his wife while dating and early in our marriage, but we hadn't seen each other since before the divorce. We arranged a lunch when I was not traveling. After I explained what happened, Will said, "That's terrible. I'm sorry, Trent. I did hear that Wolliver requested a department transfer. Now it makes sense. They're trying to avoid any HR conflicts. Does your firm have an official policy about that?" "Definitely. Violating it can mean serious trouble for the employees and the firm." "Will, could you get me a copy of that HR section?" "I can, but don't tell anyone where you got it." That Saturday, I met Will and his wife Lori at a Braves game, and he passed me a flash drive. A few days later, I discussed it with George. "Trent, I'm sorry. Even if their policy is clear, state law doesn't let you sue over this." Georgia got rid of alienation of affection laws in 1979 to decriminalize consensual relationships. That means one spouse can't sue a third party for luring the other away, including their employer, George explained, laughing at his own phrasing about Noah's behavior. "Damn," I said. I wasn't after money, but I hoped hitting the firm financially would force them to punish Noah, and maybe Reagan. George smiled. A lot of potential plaintiffs feel the same. The only exception is if the firm was formally informed and ignored it. Even then, the chances of winning are so low that most lawyers wouldn't touch it. I sighed, repeating, "Damn," he laughed. "Don't lose hope. Let's handle the spousal support first, and we can explore other options down the line." The next week, George was at the courthouse filing a new motion. With proof of Reagan and Noah's marriage license, George requested the termination of spousal support, arguing that it was no longer justified per the divorce agreement. Reagan's lawyer strongly opposed the motion, and we suspected that the license had been filed far from Atlanta to keep us from discovering it and filing this exact motion. Judge Johnson sided with us, dismissing Reagan's objections, and I was finally free from the monthly payments that had irked me since they were imposed. When I brought up another matter, George shook his head and said, "Patience, Trent, patience." 6 months later, George called and we met for lunch. "Trent, I advised patience because newlyweds need time to settle in, especially with Noah moving departments within the same firm. He would be cautious for a while, getting comfortable before seeking a new target. From what you've told me, and from past experience, now might be the right time to check up on him." 2 weeks later, Donna Hightower and her investigator confirmed that serial cheaters don't change. Noah was involved with a new subordinate. George compiled the evidence and handed it to one of his attorney friends. "We need to keep your involvement hidden, Trent. If the new judge overseeing Reagan's case discovered that your actions impacted her husband's job, she might request the reinstatement of spousal support. I doubt she'll find out from me, and I don't think Noah will tell her why if anything happens," I said. George grinned and wagged a finger. Smart thinking and true. George's attorney contact delivered the file to Noah's firm. Will later informed me that Noah was escorted out by security, and the word was that he wouldn't return. Reagan reportedly cried when she found out, but was left without answers. "Serves him right," I said after the call ended. "If I keep this up, I risk becoming a bitter old man." Smiling to myself, I decided it was a risk worth taking. Wanting to keep my name out of it in case Reagan found out and tried to reinstate spousal support, I sent an anonymous package overnight. The next evening, Melissa Ortiz called me. Trent, she said. I know you might not want to hear from me, but I had to call. Noah told me he was laid off due to corporate cutbacks and that he'd be filing to reduce alimony. But I reached out to a friend at the firm and heard the rumor. He was fired. Today I received an anonymous express package that explains it and should help the judge maintain my spousal support when Noah files his request. Trent, I think I know who to thank. So to that person, I say, thank you. I laughed. Well, if you were to ask the right person, he'd say, you're welcome, even if he couldn't admit it. And as for the package, some people never change, right? I'm sure Noah will try to play the victim when he goes before the judge. But when my lawyer presents this, I hope the judge throws it right back at him. It's ridiculous. He just got remarried. I wonder if he started cheating that fast with me too. Don't dwell on that, Melissa. It's in the past. Focus on your future and be happy. You deserve it. We said our goodbyes, and I had a feeling it would be our last conversation. I felt an unexpected lightness. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I felt truly free. I had weathered the storm, retaliated as much as I dared, and gave back the turmoil Reagan and Noah caused me without crossing the line. Reagan was likely in a tougher spot now, living in a condo instead of a nice house, with an unemployed husband paying hefty alimony and child support. And she was probably being cheated on, just as she had once betrayed me. I didn't tell her. It mirrored her silence about her infidelity. I had tried to provide the best for her, but now I suspected she had more to worry about than ever before. I'd struck back at them both and felt no regrets. Not a single one. Thinking it through, I realized I no longer used the insults that once filled my mind. The vengeance was done, and I no longer needed to think about them or care about their thoughts. That understanding brought the biggest smile of all. The smile didn't last, because, in the weeks that followed, I made one final, difficult realization. Even after feeling I had balanced the scales with Reagan and Noah, I discovered they still had a hold over me. When I had the opportunity for happiness with Melissa, I had walked away, haunted by memories of what my ex and her ex had done and the embarrassment we both faced. I had been on numerous dates and had casual relationships since then, but it became increasingly clear that I didn't truly care about any of it once the momentary thrill was gone. I realized Melissa still occupied my thoughts as much as Reagan and Noah did. While I had sought revenge and felt some satisfaction, I wasn't truly free as long as I cared about their opinions or reactions. True freedom would come when I could look at them and think, look at what you lost and what I might gain because of it. Thank you for being so foolish. With this clarity, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my recent calls until I found the number Melissa had used when she called after receiving the package about Noah's infidelity. I pressed the call button, hoping she would answer. Moments later, she did. Hi, Melissa, it's Trent Giroux. Do you have a moment to talk? Trent, you helped me recently when you didn't have to. I'm listening. I had an epiphany tonight, and if I'm not too late, I'd like to talk with you and see if I have a chance to make things right. There was silence on the line, though I could hear her breathing, so I continued. I've realized that while I advised you to let go of the past, I haven't been following my own advice. I was so consumed with what happened and how it destroyed my life that I failed to look forward. I want to apologize for that, and if you're willing, I'd like to try to make things right with you. She stayed silent as I continued, and I could almost imagine Melissa nodding in understanding on the other end of the line. To my relief, she wasn't seeing anyone, and to my surprise, she agreed to give us another chance, taking things slowly to see where they might lead. The following weekend, we had our second first date with clear intentions to go slow, though sometimes life has its own plans. When I walked her to her door, she invited me in. We poured wine and talked on her couch until past 11. As I mentioned it was getting late, our goodnight kiss lingered longer than expected. Despite our plans, it became clear that the attraction between us was strong. Smiling, she lay against me, touching me and whispering, "If you don't mind forgetting that slow talk, neither will I if we go to my bedroom." We laughed as I carried her upstairs and gently placed her by the bed. We undressed each other, and I eased her onto the sheets. She kissed me softly, handed me a protection, and then climbed on top of me. Our kisses deepened, shifting from her lips to her neck, shoulders, and her soft chest. Each movement brought me closer, and when I arched up on her next slide, she smiled as I entered her. We moved slowly, letting the moment build as our bodies connected, with the rhythm of our breathing and her soft moans as the soundtrack. Watching the sweat form on her brow from effort and focus made me smile, grateful that we had found each other again and were taking this second chance despite my earlier stubbornness. When Melissa began to tire, I felt her weight shift onto me, so I gently rolled her over and took the lead. We continued our lovemaking, gradually increasing the pace as her moans grew shorter and quicker. We reached a crescendo together, with her head arching back as she climaxed, and I felt my own release, seeing stars as I came. Afterward, we lay in silence, holding each other. It was early in our renewed relationship, just the first date. But in my heart, I wished for more, and from the way she looked at me, I sensed she might feel the same. After some time and a bit of cleanup, we returned to bed, holding each other close. Melissa rested partly on my chest, meeting my eyes. "Trent, you don't have to go. You can stay, if you'd like." I smiled at her, then leaned in for a kiss. I'd like that a lot. Though we faced some challenges in the following months, we realized we shared values on the most important things, and the minor differences didn't matter when there was mutual affection. What I felt for her after that second date deepened over time, and I soon admitted to myself that it had been more than just like from the start. Melissa came to the same realization, and we began making plans for our future. We married a little over a year after rekindling our relationship, with little Ansley as our flower girl. When Melissa and I said our vows, we meant them. We did run into Noah a few times, but it didn't play out as I once feared. The first time, he tried to make a sly comment about taking seconds, but I stopped him. In a quiet voice just for him, I said, "Noah, thank you for taking Reagan, the cheating liar, off my hands. If you think she'll be more loyal to you than she was to me, you're even more foolish than I thought. And thank you for giving me the chance to be with Melissa, a woman worth everything you failed to appreciate. Trust me, I got the better end of the deal." He almost choked on his words, clenching his fists in frustration, before realizing that any attempt to hit me would only result in him getting hurt. Recognizing this just in time and sparing both himself and Ansley from a scene, he turned away and went back to his daughter. He lifted her up, kissed her, whispered something, then set her down and told Melissa goodnight. A few months later, he mentioned to her that he was in the middle of a divorce from Reagan, and finally understood that what I had said was true. When he tried to bring up the past, Melissa shut him down firmly. "It's unfortunate you realized that too late, Noah. Don't bring it up again." Since then, whenever we've crossed paths, Noah has remained silent on the topic, though I sometimes see a hint of regret in his eyes when he sees us together. And I always smile. Present day. Ansley is now 6 and spending time at her Ortiz grandparents' house while I hold Melissa's hand, feeling her squeeze it tightly as she pushes with all her strength. The doctor gives the final order, and Melissa lets out one last push. Exhausted, she leans back, and I kiss her forehead as the doctor and nurse work at the foot of the bed. The obstetrician looks up moments later and beams at us. "Mr. and Mrs. Giroux, congratulations. You have a beautiful baby boy." At that moment, all the challenges and hardships we faced to reach this point felt worthwhile. I realized that, despite everything, I wouldn't change a thing.